September 17th, 2013 started out as a day like every other. The school year had recently begun, so I went from classroom to classroom just waiting for the bell to finally ring and release all of my friends and I from our middle school prison. But it's when I got into the car that everything changed, because my mom had shown me the brand new copy of Grand Theft Auto 5 that I was now the proud owner of. After we got home, the first thing I did was pop that baby into my Xbox 360 and watch the opening cutscene to begin the longest awaited video game of my entire life. From that moment to now, and the near 12 years in between, I've spent hundreds, if not thousands of hours playing this game across more console generations than anybody could have anticipated back then. And while most of that time was spent in the game's online mode, a healthy amount of it was also dedicated to walking in the shoes of Michael, Trevor, and Franklin. And it's that time in particular that we'll be talking about today. Now, I'd like to point out that for the first chunk of that time, I feel that GTA 5 was adored by most of its players due to its groundbreaking innovations as well as its captivating gameplay. But as time has rolled on, so too has a wave of nostalgia for the franchise's earlier iterations, resulting in a deafening of the rose-tinted glasses with which we may have viewed the title in the beginning. But are we positive this was the case? I mean, when GTA 4 came out, it received backlash for leaving out a multitude of the content that existed in the 3D Universe titles. But if you ask the franchise's current fan base, you'll likely hear it be heralded as one of the series' greatest entries. With this perspective in our minds, can we so confidently say that GTA 5 is as bad as many claim it is? Or is it more possible that the community's disdain has come from fatigue of the title? In this video, I'm going to analyze several aspects of Grand Theft Auto 5. Things like its story, a few of its characters, its general gameplay, some of its new or revived features, and its soundtrack. And I'm going to try to remain as objective as I can while doing so to figure out if this game is overrated or overhated. But quick disclaimer, I'm going to refrain from talking about GTA Online in this video, unless the mode holds enough relevance to a specific topic to warrant a mention. Reason being because that mode has become such its own beast that the whole game is named after it on the newest consoles. And there's also just an unfathomable amount of content that Rockstar have released for it over the past 12 years that I just don't even want to talk about the mode, to be quite frank. Maybe I'll cover it someday in the future, but I can already tell this is going to be a lengthy enough video and I'm not trying to, at the least, quadruple my workload. Sorry if that upsets you, but I value my sanity more than your feelings. Anyway, to get back on track, Grand Theft Auto 5's reputation throughout its lifespan has arguably been the most divisive out of any GTA in history, and over the next however many minutes this video ends up being, I'm gonna tell you why. Ludendorff, North Yankton, 9 years ago. These are the first words we read before we're dropped into the shoes of Michael Townley in the midst of a routine bank heist. At first, everything's going well with a few minor hiccups, including one where Michael is intercepted by a security guard who unmasks him, inducing our protagonist to recite the now famous line,
"You can get 1,000 things every day. How about you make sure this is one of them?"
As the guard holds him at gunpoint, we're prompted to enact the character switch mechanic for the first time to take control of Trevor Phillips, who makes short work of that guard. Afterwards, our first ever pair of protagonists make their way out of the building and shoot their way through a platoon of cops until they reach their getaway vehicle, only for their driver to get domed by some tailing cops, which forces Michael to take the wheel and swiftly deal with their pursuers. From here, the gang proceed forward in the hopes of reaching their evac. But when a train that even CJ couldn't follow runs them off the road, Trevor suggests they continue on foot and take a shortcut to the helicopter, only for Michael to insist that they go the intended route. The group does as Michael says, and when this mysterious sniper shows up, he lines up his shot and fires, just as Brad, the third crew member, crosses in front of Trevor. Then, after Michael checks on his fallen comrade, he stands upright with his chest completely exposed to the sniper, and ends up getting shot as well. As the sounds of sirens fade in, the cops arrive to apprehend our band of thieves, sparking Trevor's last stand where he tries his best to defend his friends, but he's soon overrun and forced to make a break for the chopper to end the mission. As Trevor fades into the snowy horizon, we fade to the next cutscene of Michael's funeral, where we see his crying wife mourn for him while the sniper who brought him down lurks a few graves away. Then, the plot thickens some more when the camera cuts to show Michael watching the whole thing from outside the graveyard, confirming to the player that he had just faked his death. Finally, the Grand Theft Auto 5 logo pops up on our screen, signifying the official start of the game. Right off the bat, GTA 5 tells us that it's going to be like no other Grand Theft Auto that's come before it. Never before have we gotten an entire prologue mission for one of these games, nor have we ever even started one of these stories with a mission packed with as much action as this one. GTA 5 explodes out of the gates with an exciting introduction that quickly distinguishes itself from the much more grounded and mellowed out beginning of GTA 4. And while the earlier title has gone on to be known for its dramatically cinematic storytelling, it's abundantly clear that the later title intends to tell its story in a more electrifyingly cinematic fashion. How well it'll succeed at this attempt remains to be seen. But for now, let's continue on our journey in the modern day of 2013. The next cutscene opens with a more aged Michael venting about his unhappy life to his therapist. After their session ends, the game quickly shows off its technical superiority as we watch numerous NPCs go about their day throughout the beautiful Vespucci Beach. At the end of this showcase, a couple of fine gentlemen from the hood walk by Michael and ask him about one of the beach houses before they roll up on it to repossess a couple of cars. It's at this point that we take control of our third protagonist, Franklin Clinton, who takes one of the cars for a joyride while his friend Lamar takes the other one until we bring them back to the dealership the two work at. It's here that we meet Franklin's employer, Simeon, who's in the process of selling a car to this fat white boy who immediately offends everybody.
No, I'm not calling nobody a nigga. Wait, what the fuck?
After this cutscene, we take Lamar and head back to the house where we don't let a load come up in our crib, prompting the iconic cutscene we all know and love.
Maybe you got rid of that old yee ass haircut you got, you get some bitches on your dick.
In our next couple of missions, Simeon names Franklin his Employee of the Month, which draws out a crisis within our protagonist as he feels he's stuck in life in that he can't move up in the world. Coincidentally enough, his life would soon be taking an unfathomable turn as he ends up having to repossess the car that fat white boy from earlier bought. But as it turns out, that kid happens to be Michael's son, and he's not too fond of this fine gentleman from the hood breaking and entering into his house to take back the car. And that's exactly why he presumably spent hours, or quite possibly even days, hiding under a blanket in the back of said car waiting for this exact scenario to play out. Ah yes, retirement. Anyway, when Michael catches Franklin in the act, he puts a gun to the back of his head and forces him to drive the car straight through Simeon's dealership, before giving his new black son a few bucks for all the missed birthdays and then beating the custody out of his former father. Or, you know, something along those lines, at least close enough anyway. Following this mission, Michael, whose last name is now DeSanta, becomes playable again, giving us access to different mission chains for each character. One interesting thing I'd like to note here is that while some missions can only be started by one of our protagonists, others can feature multiple of them and can sometimes be started by any of them. And whichever one you choose will determine the point at which the opening cutscene will start. This is just a cool little detail that adds a bit of immersion since, in a way, it shows to me that life in San Andreas carries on whether we're there or not. Anyway, in our first missions as Michael, we're introduced to each member of his family and given insight into each of their dynamics with him. As his wife Amanda and daughter Tracy argue over some bullshit, Michael tunes them out to the sounds of Phil Collins as he bathes under the sun, until Franklin strangely shows up because he of all people can't read sarcasm.
I wasn't really serious about that.
What?
Nevertheless, our two protagonists share a dialogue where the aged criminal tries to give some life advice to the younger one, and it's clear they're already forming a bond. Soon, Michael offers to buy Franklin that beer, but just as they're about to take off, Michael's fat shit of a son Jimmy calls to tell him that his yacht is being stolen by some gangsters he was trying to sell it to. This leads our duo to track the boat down and save Jimmy in a death-defying chase down the highway where Franklin proves himself to his new rich dad. Next up, Michael walks in on Amanda having an affair with her tennis coach, which naturally leads to our duo tearing down a Vinewood Hills stilt house that belongs to the leader of a Mexican cartel. Naturally. We'll come back to this in a minute, but lastly, we have a mission where Michael ends up having to drag Tracy away from a yacht party before the guests presumably run a train on her. What a fun family. In all seriousness though, I like this chain of missions for showing us Michael's relationship with his family. Sure, the missions may not be the most exciting. Father-son literally lets you autopilot most of the mission after all, but there have to be some calm moments to make the thrilling ones feel more exhilarating. And I feel these somewhat more grounded missions do their job well. Back to Franklin now. Lamar comes up with a plan to kidnap Abala and ransom him in exchange for some cash. With the help of our good boy Chop, we manage to capture him, but the plan falls apart when Lamar not only ditches his mask like a, and excuse my language here, retard, but he also fucks things up by calling the Ballas on his very traceable personal phone. In the end, we have to let the Balla go. Following this, Lamar brings this OG, Stretch, to meet up with us and go along with us on a drug deal. As soon as our protagonist encounters Stretch, the tension between them is made very clear as Franklin immediately disrespects disrespect to the OG. Nonetheless, they put their beef aside to take care of this deal, but as it turns out, Lamar's dumbass has walked them into the most obvious trap ever by trying to do business with that Balla we kidnapped earlier. Sure enough, the Ballas roll up onto the site, prompting Stretch to put this clown down before we fight our way out of the warehouse. After a subsequent escape from the cops, Stretch tells us that he's gonna throw us under the bus if that's what it takes to restore peace with the Ballas. And in response, Franklin declares that he and Lamar are done with Stretch's gang CGF and all the bullshit that comes with it. With that, we head back to the house and split from the others. As it turns out, this would be the last time Franklin would see Stretch in person for the rest of the game, which is an awfully strange choice considering Stretch ends up becoming one of this story's main antagonists. But we'll talk more about this later. As for these missions themselves, I think they do a great job at showing us why Franklin has the mindset that he had when talking to Simeon earlier, that no matter how much hard work he puts in, he feels doomed to never have anything to show for it. But again, that would soon change with this next set of missions. After tearing down the house of Martin Madrazo, a rich and powerful cartel leader, Michael determines that he needs to make a lot of money and fast to pay him back for the damages. This leads to our retired thief calling up an old friend, Lester, to help him get back in the game.
So you're back in the game? I guess.
Following a rather unique mission where we end up killing this guy who is definitely not meant to be Mark Zuckerberg. Hello? Lester, who was always the brains behind Michael's scores back in the day, notifies him of a couple of options to make some cash. The first of which is a bank up in the sticks, while the second is a much more local jewel store. Our protagonist opts for the latter, and we quickly get to work. After casing the joint to get an idea of the layout, Lester comes up with a couple of different plans to rob the place, and it's up to the player to decide which approach to take. Not only that, but it's also our choice on who we'd like to bring along for this job, and we can either pick from a pool of generic goons, or if we've met certain characters either in the story or out in the open world, we'll have a few other options to choose from. Personally, I prefer to recruit Packy McCreary from GTA 4 as my gunman, and Ricky, a tech nerd who we made unemployed by killing his boss, as my hacker. Then, after a few setup missions to gather the supplies we need, we set out to take the rocks and ultimately make a clean getaway. Once the job is done, Lester wires the owed money to Madrazo, while the rest will eventually be given to the crew. Our protagonists then regroup at Michael's house to celebrate, but it's here that a man named Dave walks in to confront us about the heist. As we would later learn, Dave is an agent of the FIB, and he's the sniper who killed Brad and shot Michael during the prologue. He's here because he knows Michael was behind the heist, and he has a bad feeling that their past is about to come back to haunt them. I should note here that during this job, Michael makes a very critical mistake, because as he deals with a security guard outside the store, he makes sure to drop that same movie quote he said during the prologue.
You forget 1,000 things every day, pal. Make sure this is one of them.
Fast forward back to when our two protagonists are talking with Dave, and at the same time, a man in the desert has the news on in the background while he's busy fucking a girl. But he drops everything, except for his pants which he pulls back up, when he hears that security guard utter that phrase. It's at this moment that the man, our third protagonist, Trevor Phillips, has a revelation that his old heist crewmate is alive, and it is now his top priority to find him. As if he'd seen a ghost, Trevor walks out of his trailer and tries to process what he's witnessed, only for Johnny Klebitz, protagonist of The Lost and Damned and a shell of his former self, to confront him over fucking his girl. Once he finally garners Trevor's attention, our current protagonist makes a mockery out of him before brutally murdering him, marking the first time in this series' history that one protagonist has ever killed another. Following this explosive introduction, Trevor takes his lackeys, Wade and Ron, to go find the lost MC and take out the majority of their Sandy Shores chapter. Once they're dealt with, he then confronts the leader of the Varios Los Aztecas and either threatens him if the player is a bitch, or kills him if the player is a real gamer, effectively eliminating the majority of his gun-running competition in the span of a single mission. Over the next few missions, Trevor continues taking the fight to his rivals to ensure that he gets a contract with a Chinese triad, and he does so by exterminating what's left of the Lost, as well as by wiping out the remaining Aztecas who have decided to retaliate against us. But despite Trevor's efforts, the triads ultimately decide to partner with the one faction he hadn't taken care of yet, the O'Neill brothers. So he swiftly, but also angrily, genocides most of their bloodline and destroys their house. Right, so this mission chain is absolutely action-packed and does a great job at establishing Trevor as an unstoppable psychopath who won't hesitate to put down anybody who dares get in his way. Not even former protagonists are safe from his wrath, which, as much as it sucked to see a character I loved get made into such a bitch, it does a pretty damn incredible job at establishing our new protagonist as a monster. The only thing I take a bit of issue with, though, is if Trevor had the capability to single-handedly destroy all of his competition within the span of maybe a few days, what the hell took him so long? It's pretty clear that the other factions are pretty well established by the time we take control of Trevor, so they've clearly been around for a while, and Trevor himself is pretty attached to Sandy Shores, so I doubt he had just recently arrived either. So so it's not like either side just showed up. I get that the idea that Michael possibly being alive could have awoken something in him to suddenly take everybody else out, but I don't know, it just feels like weird timing to me. Maybe I'm being nitpicky here, but I just wanted to share this small dissatisfaction real quick. Back to the story now. Once the other factions have been dealt with, Trevor receives news from Wade that he's tracked Michael down to Los Santos, and so the two embark on a road trip down south. On the way though, Trevor gets word that a separate Lost MC chapter is in town to mourn their fallen brothers, so he makes sure to kill its members too for shits and giggles. Then, after a long drive in which Trevor tells Wade a tale about Trisha and Michelle, the two arrive at Wade's cousin's girlfriend's apartment where our protagonist decides they'll be staying, regardless of the opinions of its pre-existing occupant.
Now would you get me a fucking drink? I'm not gonna ask you again.
After he settles in, Trevor makes his grand reappearance to Michael and his dysfunctional family, plus a yoga instructor, but minus Tracy, who's apparently auditioning for the GTA universe's equivalent to America's Got Talent, Fame or Shame. And by auditioning, I mean... Anyway, when Tracy recognizes Trevor, we get this pretty wholesome moment that I really like where she just has to run to him and give him a hug, which is greatly complemented by this moment where Trevor gives the security guard some Chris Benoit style CTE with a chair shot to the back of the fucking head. After this scene, our reunited duo chase down the show's host and longtime GTA radio personality Laszlo, who makes his first ever physical appearance in this mission, and we threaten him to dance without his pants while Trevor records the whole thing in portrait mode, presumably because he knows TikTok will be a thing in like 5 or 6 years. Respect to my boy for playing the long game on this one. Then, after they finish humiliating Laszlo, our two protagonists part ways on a surprisingly positive note. This mission itself may not be the funnest by any means, seeing as how its most challenging objective is a short chase, but I really like how it showcases Michael and Trevor's rekindled friendship. On the way to Fame or Shame, Michael talks to Trevor about his day as if it hadn't been nearly a decade since the last time they'd seen each other, and while Trevor is initially reluctant to have such a casual conversation with him, the way they end things feels a lot more like two good friends saying see you later to each other, rather than a tense goodbye. It's not like it feels forced or anything either, but actually rather natural after they had just bonded over bullying Laszlo. At the end of the mission though, Michael calls Dave and ends up meeting with him to tell him that Trevor is back in the picture. In response, Dave tells us that his job is in jeopardy, and that if we can't help him save it, then our freedom will be in jeopardy too. This starts a brief chain of missions where we work with the FIB to kidnap a contact the IAA kidnapped first, and then torture him until he gives us information on a terrorist, even though he probably would have told us everything if we had just asked. But where's the fun in that? It's during this mission chain that Franklin and Trevor meet, and also that they learn of Michael's association with the feds. And from here on, all three of them are under the boot of Steve Haynes, Dave's higher-up. Around this time, we also begin working on the second or third heist of this game. See, after Trevor gets word that Floyd, Wade's cousin's girlfriend's boyfriend, my bad, that's Bob I'm thinking of. Let's see here. Wade's cousin's girlfriend's unknowing cuck, there we go, works at the docks, which Trevor knows may be loaded with some highly valuable cargo. He takes the cousins to go scout the port. According to Floyd, this government-funded private militia called Merryweather has been occupying the docks recently, and the cargo they've been watching over has drawn his suspicion, which, for lack of better words, arouses Trevor's curiosity. After doing some tedious and monotonous work that I'm kind of surprised actually made it into a GTA game, Trevor puts together a couple of plans and leaves it to the player on which approach to take. No matter the choice, all three of our protagonists get together to rob Merryweather of an experimental superweapon, which Trevor intends to sell to the Triads in exchange for some cash. However, just as they pull off the job, Lester arrives to tell them that stealing this thing will result in all of them being marked for death by the government, prompting our favorite psychopath to let Lester give it back, before giving himself some Chris Benoit-style CTE, headbutts and all. While Trevor was busy planning and prepping his failed heist in the boringest way possible, Michael was also busy losing his family in somehow an even more boring manner. After getting into another pointless fight with Amanda, our favorite soon-to-be divorced dad is persuaded into trying yoga just to spite her. This means that we, the player, are now being forced to play what's gotta be one of the least fun minigames in all of Grand Theft Auto for the next several minutes. At least scouting the port to let me bring out that repressed Tonka construction side of me. This yoga shit, on the other hand, feels more torturous than what Mr. K went through. Anyway, after sitting through the longest minutes of this entire game, the yoga instructor gets into a rather questionable position with Amanda, prompting a valid enough crash out that results in Michael getting sidestepped into the pool. Now having witnessed her husband be emasculated by this, and excuse my language here, Amanda leaves us for him. Right, so with that bridge burned, I guess the next logical step is to have some father-son time with Jimmy. What could go wrong? Oh, I just fucking hate you, you fat little shit. You see this? This type of shit is why I love Franklin more. Anyway, drug trip time. Oh, and by the way, Amanda and the kids are moving out. That's neat. Okay, I can't take this depressive shit anymore. What the hell's Franklin up to?
Shut the fuck up! Shut the fuck up!
Ah, he's making friends with Trevor. Also neat. Yeah, so in this mission, Stretch has put Lamar up to buy some coke in the ballless territory of Grove Street. God, that just feels so wrong to say. But as we suspect due to Stretch's involvement, it ends up being a setup when the brick turns out to be drywall. Thanks, Trevor.
You can't fucking hustle a hustler!
Yeah, this shit goes south real quickly and results in a shootout with the ballas, the cops, and MC Clip.
Hey, you nasty, homie.
All because Lamar doesn't know better than to trust Stretch. But surely he'll view this as a learning experience and not make the same mistake again later. Alright, so remember a minute ago when I said that the Merryweather heist was the second or third heist in this game? Well, you can consider this next one to be the third or second heist, as you can do it before or after the other one. So yeah, long story short, Steve Haynes needs us to steal some of the IAA's funding for the FIB, which leads to us T-boning the fuck out of this armored car in exchange for some cash. The heist itself isn't that important in the grand scheme, but it leads us directly into our next arc of the story. See, once the IAA's bonds are collected, Michael takes them and delivers them to this billionaire Devin Weston, who wants to hire our trio of protagonists to steal a quintet of cars. At first, Michael rejects the job offer as he has no interest in working for this asshole, but after he mentions that he can put us in contact with the legendary movie producer Solomon Richards, Michael perks up and accepts the job from this suddenly lovely gentleman. On the way back into town, he then calls Franklin to tell him about the guy, optimistically stating that they've been given a real opportunity here. Onward to said opportunity, from here on, our heroes begin acquiring the exotic cars for Weston, but it's only after we recover the first pair of them that he tells us that he won't give us a dime until all 5 vehicles are in his possession. Having become victims of the sunk cost fallacy, our trio reluctantly agree to work for free temporarily under the assumed condition that they'll be paid in full upon completion of the entire job. But you know what they say about those who assume, don't you? Well, if you don't, you'll have to wait until later to find out, because this job ain't gonna be finished for quite a while. All we're able to do for now is take 4 of the cars, and we do so through a few interesting enough missions. In the first, Franklin goads a couple of frat kids into racing him halfway around the map until they're all pulled over by Michael and Trevor, who are cosplaying as cops. Once they've taken the cars, we can choose who we'd like to play as and race the others back to Devin's garage. Next, Trevor uses an LSPD chopper to identify the owner of the rare Z-Type, and helps Franklin chase him across Los Santos and into a parking garage where the latter protagonist repos the car. Lastly, Franklin is tasked with infiltrating the film studio and stealing this James Bond mobile, complete with spikes to pop some tires, and an ejector seat to deal with unruly passengers. These missions are pretty interesting for the most part, seeing as how they give us access to unique scenarios, like almost playing as a cop or piloting a helicopter with a camera. And the last one is just fun, as it gives you some cool toys to play with in the spy car. What I find particularly interesting about this chain of missions, though, is how Devin Weston tries to get inside Franklin's head. Understanding the potential of this protagonist and knowing how useful he could be in the future, Devin makes an effort to get him on his side as he tells him that the older dudes he's been hanging out with are only holding him back. We'll revisit this later on, but it's just some interesting foreshadowing I wanted to give mention to. Anyway, while the rest of the gang have been busy dealing with Devin's cars, Michael has been making major moves in his own life. The first of these involves that movie producer Solomon Richards, with whom our protagonist immediately hits it off. Let me just say, by the way, I love these two's interactions. The level of respect Michael shows Solomon, and the amount of pride he shows us in return, it seriously feels like they share a wholesome father-son dynamic that they've both been missing their entire lives. And it's so heartwarming to see our usually bitter and angry protagonist feel so happy and comfortable to be around another character. They even have this fun recurring bit every time they interact, where Solomon recites a quote and Michael names which one of his movies it's from. That's enough about these two's relationship though. The reason Solomon needs Michael here is because he's having trouble with his movie's talent. Long story short, this jackass Rocco, who you may recognize from the Ballad of Gay Tony, has pulled a couple of his clients from the film. So Solomon tasks us with beating the piss out of him and convincing his clients to come back to set. Michael even goes above and beyond and threatens one of them to apologize to Solomon as well because he just loves his new dad that much. By the end of things, Solomon rewards us by naming us an associate producer of the film. And even though his whole family recently left him, you can tell Michael's climbing back up to a high point in his life now that he's living his dream. How great is it then that he's about to piss off that Mexican cartel boss again? Yeah, so at this point in the story, Martin Madrazo re-enters the picture because he wants Michael and Franklin to do another job for him in exchange for, well, not cash this time, but perhaps a favor down the road. However, Michael decides to do Franklin a favor by getting Martin to instead recruit Trevor, who misinterprets the situation and he kinda gets a little angry. And, well, you could say one thing leads to another, and...
But I did kidnap his wife! Oh no! Oh
shit.
Needless to say, Martine's not the happiest camper after this, and now Michael and Trevor are on his hit list, meaning they'll have to hide out at Trevor's trailer up in Sandy Shores until they can find a way to make things right. Of course, Trevor doesn't mind this at all and is excited to be back home, but you've got to feel for Michael here. First he loses his family, then he's just had his dream job ripped away from him, and now he has to live out in the boonies. Yeah, he is just not having a great time. But just because they're living off the grid, it doesn't mean they're off the radar of Steve Haynes and company. After Trevor fucks with Merriweather some more CJ style, our pals at the FIB come up here to tell us that they'll need us for a big job soon, but first we need to source the gear required for it. Of course, our band of thieves are relatively broke, so we'll need to find a way to come up with a lot of cash fast. You know what that means. Now remember earlier in the story when Lester was suggesting places to rob? Well, Michael sure remembered, and conveniently enough, the place he initially passed on was a bank in the sticks. After giving Lester a quick call, the gang quickly gets to work at scouting the place, and once they have a plan ready and have acquired some hardware, we get Franklin up here to pull off the most absurdly over-the-top bank heist of all time. The job starts off as any regular one with our crew storming the place and raiding the cash, but when the cops show up, they find themselves standing toe-to-toe against a gang of juggernauts. We promptly bulldoze our way through Paleto Bay's entire police force until they call in the goddamn army and start flying actual fucking tanks in to stop us. Speaking of bulldozing, Franklin then comes into the bulldozer, because he was a Tonka kid too apparently, to create the ultimate killdozer, and he carries us past the tanks that I guess are being driven by stormtroopers and into the Cluckenbell factory where we catch a train to make our escape. Why the cops didn't simply follow the damn train is anyone's guess, but I'm sure they're still being haunted by the ghost of Big Smoke to this very day for this sacrilege. Once the score's been taken, our crew are intercepted by Steve Haynes' lackey, Mexican Obama, who takes the bulk of the cash for our future job, but he leaves each of our protagonists with a stack of cash that's somehow worth damn near $500,000. So far, I'd have to say this is the funnest heist at this point of the game. It may be pretty simple and straightforward, sure, but it's also such a fun power fantasy that gives you the chance to just fuck up everything in your path, and I can always get down to that. Also, one extra thing I liked about this heist is how during the car ride to the bank, our protagonists each reminisce about their first scores, with Michael citing that his first heist took place near Carcer City, the setting of Manhunt. But what I find really cool here is how your gunmen will join the conversation and talk about their first heist as well. As you could probably guess, I almost always pick Packy for this job, and while he briefly talked about how his first scores mostly consisted of spotting for his brother Gerald, he mainly talks about his biggest job, the Bank of Liberty, aka the heist we take part in during the mission 3-Leaf Clover in GTA 4. Alright, now that this heist is over, let's talk about a couple of the other things that have been going down on the side. First off, well, remember how Trevor went on that rampage a while ago and just decided to exterminate his entire competition? Well, the ghosts of his past have come back to haunt him because the remaining O'Neill brothers are hunting him down. Thankfully, these ghosts are about as threatening as Casper the Friendly, and with the help of Franklin and Chop, as well as possibly Bigfoot, we swiftly, but much less angrily, finish off their bloodline. Meanwhile, Trevor gets word that the monthly train is coming through. So after he follows it CJ style, and somehow survives this, he and Michael loot this golden idol off of Merriweather. Problems arise when the two argue over what to do with the take, however, as Michael wants to give it to Martin Madrazo as a peace offering so he can return to Los Santos, while Trevor, who not only doesn't care for Los Santos, but has also established a Stockholm Syndromic relationship with Patricia, Martin's wife he kidnapped, would rather keep it for himself. But just as Trevor is about to walk off with it, Michael offers to pull off a bigger job. No, not a bigger job, but the biggest job, in exchange for taking the idol. Michael offers him the Union Depository. Let me just say something. I love this cutscene. This is the cutscene that reveals to us, and maybe even reveals to our protagonists themselves, that taking scores, robbing banks, stealing super weapons, it's never been for the money, it's been for the sport. While Trevor is initially hesitant to agree to the job, not believing it's really possible, Michael appeals to the young kid inside of him, ultimately convincing him to take the deal for the love of the goddamn game, for the possibility of actually pulling off the big one. With that, Michael passes the idol over to Lester and looks forward to moving back down to LS. But before anything else, Steve Haynes needs us all to meet with him right now to pull off that job because terror never sleeps, or some stupid bullshit. When we arrive, Steve and Dave realize they forgot to tell us to bring a large crew, but the former still tries to coax us into doing it alone. That's when Trevor calls them out and convinces them to join us in the field, which they do because they know this is their only shot at getting this job done. Now you may be wondering, what the hell is this job anyway? Well, it's simple. Humane Labs is housing a nerve toxin that the IAA plans to give to a terrorist to use on a densely populated area, which would result in an increase in funding. That means that our team will have to scuba dive into the facility, stun anybody that gets in our path, recover the nerve toxin, fight our way through Merriweather security, shoot ourselves in the leg, what? Alright, you know what? Fuck it. Take it easy, Steve. Anyway, the rest of the crew fly the toxin out to a secure location, and whatever happens to it from there isn't our business. But with that business settled, Michael gets a text from Lester saying that Martine has received the idol and he'll be cleared to return home, just as soon as Trevor returns the wife. After this cutscene, we transition over to Trevor, who is in the midst of driving her home, while If You Leave Me Now by Chicago appropriately plays on the radio. On the way, the two share an emotional dialogue in which they reminisce about the time they had together. Patricia tells him that she sees the beauty inside of him while Trevor tearfully expresses his sadness. In the end, Trevor drops her off, and as she dismissively returns to her husband, we finally see exactly how angry our protagonist got. And it appears to be more than just a little, since I assume Martine's been going by the nickname Van Gogh since. Following a bit of threatening, Trevor drives off, and the Madrazos are never seen again. Well, at least until... Anyway, now that things are squared with Madrazo, Trevor and Michael are finally free to return to Los Santos. Trevor looks to return to his lovely home with Floyd and his girlfriend Deborah. But after a rather heated discussion,
You people are not very
Fucking nice!
he decides to reside at the strip club instead. It's here that the last major arc of the story begins, because it's here that we begin planning the heist of the Union Depository. Once we've established our base of operations, our group begins scouting the place by taking note of its level of security, as well as by reconning a couple of its entry points. To do this, we have to split up into two teams, and this gives Trevor the opportunity to talk to Lester about one last job he wants to do after we take the UD for everything it's got. But this job doesn't involve robbing a bank or stealing some jewels, or really anything that we may have gotten accustomed to by this point in the story. No. The job Trevor wants to pull is to break Brad out of prison. Lester is very hesitant to agree to this job, which is unsurprising since he knows the truth about Brad, and after trying to convince Trevor that their old crewmate is a lost cause, he ultimately shifts that burden onto Michael. Fast forward a mission or two later, and suddenly Trevor is at Michael's house to get him on board with the plan. At first though, this cutscene starts off with Trevor just looking to provide his friend with some company, trying to build him up a bit as he can sense how sad he is about his family still being gone. But after a minute, he starts to psych Michael up before telling him that he wants to bust out Brad, citing that with Franklin and Lester on their side too, this new heist crew would be unstoppable with him. Michael essentially declines, however, and tells his friend that his passion isn't robbing banks, but rather making movies. So once they take the Union Depository, he wants out of the game. Trevor retorts that this isn't just a game, this is his way of life. And from here, the two delve into an argument that quickly turns heated. That is, until Trevor scarily calms down because he needs to ask Michael a serious question. He asks who was buried in Michael's grave back in North Yankton. While Michael tries to play it cool, we can see the gears turn in Trevor's head until it finally clicks with him, and he suddenly becomes dead set on finding that answer at the source. At this point, he storms out of the house, steals Michael's car, and drives all the way up to his airstrip to fly out to North Yankton. Meanwhile, Michael drives down to the airport and takes a flight up there. Now, one really awesome detail about this mission is that there's two ways it can play out, and it depends on who you start the mission as. If you start it as Trevor, he'll call Ron on the way up to Sandy Shores to see if there's a plane available, and he'll end up having a mental breakdown where he tries to process and rationalize what's going through his head. Meanwhile, if you start the mission as Michael, he'll call Dave and tell him that Trevor knows what happened, and Dave will respond in a distressed tone as he knows he's fucked if Michael can't calm him down. Then, when our protagonist arrives at the airport, we see a few triads watching him from the street, saying that they'll have people on the plane we board. After the trip, we then take control of Michael while he's driving through Ludendorff, and we can hear his own voice haunt him as he relives both his conversation with Amanda where he told her about the deal he made, as well as the heist itself and what went wrong during it. Finally, the two paths realign when Michael approaches Trevor just as he's nearly finished digging up the grave. Just like he had done when they were in Los Santos, Michael gives it one more try to convince Trevor to stop. Of course, after coming all this way, Trevor isn't just gonna quit now. He has to know, he needs to know. So finally, he breaks the casket open, and sure enough, there's Brad. I mean, his body's so decomposed that he almost looks like that thing from SpongeBob that yells, "Chocolate!" But it's Brad nonetheless. Even after Trevor finally confirms the betrayal, Michael continues attempting to gaslight him as he tries to claim he had nothing to do with this. But Trevor doesn't buy it and draws his gun, prompting Michael to do the same. As they each hold each other at gunpoint, they both try to goad the other into taking the shot since neither of them can bring themselves to do it. Soon, their Mexican standoff is broken by the Chinese, kind of a strange combination, but I'll allow it, when those triads from earlier show up. They're here because they're pissed at Trevor for disrupting their business in Sandy Shores by taking out the O'Neills. And now that they've finally tracked him down. They plan on capturing him and bringing him to their boss, Wei Cheng. However, Trevor uses their distraction as a chance to escape, leaving Michael to have to deal with them. At first, our remaining protagonist holds his own against them, but when he rolls a Nat 1 car engine check, the triads capture him instead, believing they can use him as leverage to get to Trevor. Anyway, fast forward a few hours, and Trevor is nearly back home when he gets a call from Chang himself, who threatens to kill our boyfriend if we don't play ball. Of course, Trevor and his boyfriend aren't really on great terms right now, so we choose to cut our losses and leave Michael to whatever fate may befall him. Man, if only these triads had made a move like one mission ago instead, right? This whole mission may not be the most action-packed by any means, but I still thoroughly enjoy it for how important it is to the plot. This is a major turning point in the story, as from here on, Trevor and Michael despise each other for pretty valid reasons, all things considered, and it won't be until the very end of the game that their issues are resolved one way or another. Anyway, even though Michael is on the shelf for now, we've still got some business to take care of with our other two protagonists. Particularly, it's finally time to deal with the last of those cars for Devin Weston and deliver them all to his people. I should note that after we stole that James Bond spy car a while ago, Lamar suddenly showed up and got himself recruited into the fold. Feeling the need to pull his own weight, Lamar apparently takes it upon himself to take the last car that we need. And now that the whole set is in our possession, he and Franklin join Trevor to transport them all the way to Paleto Bay. Seeing as how this is an incredibly long drive in something so slow, Franklin takes the opportunity to get some shut-eye, which gives Trevor the chance to vent to Lamar about Michael and how he'd gotten rid of him. Now, as serious as this conversation should be, and as serious as it would be between any other two characters, I really love how angrily Trevor tries to explain things and how stupidly Lamar processes them.
Above all else, a fucking liar.
Homie, you sound like some bitch he ain't called. Like, he lied to me.
Honestly, these two have amazing chemistry, and after hearing their back and forth here, I just wish they had a few more missions together, man. I mean, shit, just listen to this one more clip from their talk.
Franklin's asleep. It's just me and you.
What? What you trying to say? You want me to jack you off or something?
Anyway, after a while of listening to these two, a few cops begin to tail us because they had their eyes on the ride Lamar boosted, which means it's up to Franklin to deal with them appropriately. Thankfully, that one spy car has been fitted with dual machine guns to help with that task. This is where the mission gets really fun because this is the one and only time in the game that we get to drive a vehicle like this. And the power you'll feel while popping the cops in this thing makes that near 10-minute drive up the highway totally worth it. Now then, once all the cars are delivered, we meet with Devin's lawyer Molly to finally receive our payments. However, in lieu of cash, she informs us that Devin has decided to invest the money he owes us back into his company and will supposedly make the funds available to us at a later date. In other words, he's decided to make an ass out of you and me, and our characters are not happy about it. Franklin makes his opinion known very quickly. I imagine Trevor's gotta be pissed, and Michael, wait, what's Michael up to again? Oh, yeah, he's just hanging in there. You know what? I should probably do something about that. Right, so after we deliver the cars, Franklin realizes that he hasn't heard from his rich white dad in a while. So he talks to Lester, who concludes that Trevor might know something. After our two protagonists have a talk, Lester helps us track down our third protagonist so that we can save him from the triads. Then, once we're home free, Franklin tells Michael about the deal with the cars and how Devin Weston stiffed us all on the payment. And we finally get to hear his opinion on the matter. As it turns out, Michael is on board with Devin's financial fuckery and actually thinks it's a pretty smart idea on his part. Yeah, we'll see how that changes when Devin inevitably fucks Michael too. Anyway, before our pair split up, Franklin asks Michael to come clean about what happened 9 years ago. And he finally gets the answer he was waiting for, but wasn't quite ready for. Michael tries to explain himself and help Franklin understand his perspective, citing that one day he'll have his own Amanda and his own Jimmy and Tracy, and he'll need to make a call for them. One day he'll become too worn out and too tired to keep going, and he'll need to make a call for himself. He may not understand it right now, but one day he will. In the end, Franklin warns Michael that he needs to watch out for Trevor, and in response, Michael warns Franklin that he needs to do the same. With that, our two protagonists part ways for now to continue on their own stories. Or rather, more so Michael can continue his, because this next bit of the video is going to be very Michael-centric. Now, after everything our crew has done for Steve Haynes throughout the game to harm the IAA, i.e. kidnapping a contact for them, stealing their funding, and disrupting their plans regarding the nerve toxin, they've finally begun looking into him. What's worse too is that even the FIB have been building up evidence against Haynes to bring him to justice. And if they can do so successfully, it will spell bad news for our entire gang. This means it'll be up to us and our crew to infiltrate the FIB's headquarters and delete the files they have on Haynes. But as Lester suggests during one of the setups for this job, Michael takes the opportunity to delete his own files as well in order to remove the dirt Steve has on him. This all goes down in a rather fun heist that Michael and Franklin pull off together, where we either invade the Bureau from the skies or pull off a terrorist act and pose as firemen to enter the tower. Regardless of our way in, our way out plays pretty similarly in both scenarios, as we have to fight our way through several FIB agents as we try to escape the building. In the end, our crew successfully delete all the files and make it out unscathed. As I said, I've always found this to be a pretty fun job, and it definitely ranks high out of all the heists in this game, especially if you take the roof approach here, as it guarantees more action. Anyway, with all the evidence against Haynes as well as all of Michael's files deleted, our protagonist is summoned by Dave to meet up at the court center for a debriefing. Now, before we pulled off the raid of the FIB, Michael was assured by Steve Haynes that he'd be cut loose once it was done. However, due to our repeated attacks against Merryweather, things have gotten complicated. Steve is still on the hook, but now that his blackmail against us is gone, his best option is to have Timu Officer Hernandez arrest Dave and Michael to let them take the fall. Of course, our party resists the arrest, but what's less of course is the sudden arrival of the IAA to apprehend us all. Then, to thicken the plot some more, the FIB shows up on the fake Officer Hernandez's behalf because Rockstar had to quickly fit his betrayal to Haynes in somewhere, and I guess they chose this as the time. Finally, even goddamn Merryweather shows up because fuck it, I guess. And when this news agent's trigger finger goes off, Steve just straight up executes his lackey, because even when the person of color is the one issuing the arrest, he's still the one to die when someone doesn't stop resisting. Anyway, this leads to a shootout between us as well as all three other factions. Then, just to add even more confusion to the mix, fucking Trevor magically shows up to help Michael escape alive despite the whole thing with the triads. But as he reveals after the shootout, he only did so because Michael still owes him the Union Depository. Since Trevor's betrayal back in North Yankton, planning for the job has been on ice. But now that our two protagonists' interests have realigned, we'll be getting it back on track very shortly. For now though, Michael's still got a couple of matters to handle, including getting his family back. Since Amanda and the kids have been gone, Michael has underwent quite a few highs and lows. He achieved quite the high when he became a movie producer for one of his idols, and after being given such a role, we were immediately shown how much it really meant to him. But then, it was all ripped away from him when he had to flee Los Santos because of Trevor, and you could easily sense the anger and bitterness that had consumed him once again. However, when he was forgiven by Martin, we saw that high return to him, as he would not only be able to go back home, but more importantly to him, he'd be able to return to the movie studio to continue working with Solomon. And then, we watched him reach quite the considerable low when he was nearly killed by those triads. But throughout all of these events, the constant has pretty much always been the loneliness he's felt from missing his family. So it's not very surprising to see how depressed he is when he pours himself some whiskey to just let himself waste away at the start of this next mission. After a time skip, we see Jimmy has come back home to check on Michael, who is passed out on the couch. After he wakes up, the two have a dialogue where Jimmy airs his frustrations out to his depressed dad, and in the end, Michael responds by telling him that at the rate things are going, he'll probably be dead soon. This level of defeat feels very off-putting from our protagonist, but it also feels real since it doesn't seem like he thinks he has much to live for at this point. Still, even though he feels she doesn't care for him, he still asks Jimmy how Amanda is because he still cares for her. Jimmy responds by trying to psych him up, which doesn't really work too well at first.
What the fuck?
But our protagonist eventually gets the message and goes with his son to find his wife. When we arrive, we find that she's still with that yoga instructor who wastes no time in disrespecting our entire family.
Maybe they shit once a year between them.
Prompting yet another valid enough crash out by our protagonist. Thankfully, there's no pool for him to sidestep us into this time, giving Michael free reign to use the skills he learned from Trevor as he gives this clown some Chris Benoit style CTE. You love to see it. Impressed by this show of masculinity, Amanda decides to give us another chance as long as the whole family attends a therapy session together. This brings us to Tracy, who is in the process of being groomed by Laszlo.
You'll let me on the show if I blow you?
This results in a bit of non-consensual cosmetology, where we give him a decent enough tattoo to remember her by. Anyway, once we've got Tracy on board, the whole family attends a session with Michael's therapist, which pretty much amounts to a $4,000 screaming match between the husband and wife.
How about you suck my cock?
By the end of it all, Amanda comes to the conclusion that while our family may be a dysfunctional mess of psychotic freaks, it's still the only family that we all have. And as much as others may try, nobody else can understand this family the way that we all can. So, as crazy as we all may be, we might as well try living together again now that we're at least conscious of the dysfunction. As forced as the DeSanta family's reunion may feel if you only listen to my retelling of their narrative though, I personally feel that this conclusion of Michael's character arc makes sense if you've been paying attention to those aforementioned highs and lows he's undergone. Through the trials and tribulations of his life being turned upside down, he's learned to stop taking the important things for granted by this point in the story. So it makes perfect sense, to me at least, that he finally be rewarded with the return of the family he's remembered how to love. But now that one aspect of his life has returned to normal, it's time to focus on another one he's looking to reclaim, his place at the movie studio. Now, it's been a while since we've been on set, but surely Solomon's been able to handle things on his own in our absence. Let's go check in and see how he's...
Big man!
Oh, hell fucking no. Rocco, you've assaulted my father. You're a fucking dead man. Anyway, in return for our efforts, Solomon makes it all official by showing us Michael's name credited in the movie. Our protagonist can't believe it, and you can tell by his emotion and body language that this is one of the proudest moments of his life. And it only gets better when in the very next mission, Devin Weston shows up to bin the film. Wait, that's not a good thing. That's not good at all. And Michael certainly agrees, seeing as how he ultimately chases Devin's lawyer to her gruesome death. Whoops. Oh well, anyway, let's release this movie. A few missions later, Michael and Jimmy take a limo ride to the Oriental Theater to attend the premiere of Meltdown. However, on the way there, an angry Devin Weston gives us a rather threatening phone call, and while Michael tries to calm him down and bargain for peace, the billionaire's sarcastic tone tells us he won't be too forgiving. Anyway, when we arrive at the theater, the father and son speak to a few of the VIPs like Solomon Richards, and they even get a chance to say hi to Laszlo.
Ah, Laszlo.
Oh shit, come on, shit, dick.
The only guests that are curiously absent from the event are the rest of Michael's family, but in their place is Devin Weston, who hints at the reason why Amanda and Tracy haven't arrived. As it turns out, Devin, who has a stake in Merryweather, has sent his private army to storm the DeSanta household in the hopes of killing Michael. And despite our protagonist's efforts to defend his castle, the invading party nearly get the better of him until Jimmy, of all people, saves his father's life. Then he starts teabagging the guy until he realizes...
Off me!
Anyway, after our house is secured, Michael and Amanda decide that the family needs to move out again until it becomes safe to return. Yep, just as soon as we got him back, we've lost him again. This has always been a bit of a weird narrative choice to me that the family would make such a grand return just to disappear again within just a few missions. But I guess the writers needed a valid reason for Michael to desire Devin's death, and this was the best circumstance that they could feasibly come up with. All in all, it's a bit of a weak plot point in this regard, but nonetheless, I think it's safe to say that Michael agrees with Franklin on the whole car thing now. Speaking of Franklin, what's he been up to?
Oh, hey.
Hey.
Oh hey, it's Tanisha. Who's Tanisha, you ask? She's Franklin's love interest with whom he had a relationship prior to the start of the game. You can exchange a few emails with her where she explains that she's moved on from him in the gang life to be with a doctor, and she's occasionally mentioned by the likes of Lamar and Franklin's aunt. But other than that, and the tail end of a phone call following the jewel store heist, she isn't really talked about or brought up in the story until right now, nor do I believe she's mentioned again after this mission. So for her to make her one and only physical appearance right here near the end of the game is another strange choice to me. But anyway, why is she here? It's because Lamar's stupid ass got set up by Stretch yet again, and Tanisha somehow found out about it. So she pleads with us to drive all the way up to Paleto Bay to save him. Franklin explains that he's gotten sick of risking his own life to save Lamar every time he gets himself into one of these situations because he never learns from them. To which Tanisha responds by calling him an asshole for not looking out for the homies he left behind in the hood. I'm not gonna lie, I see a lot of shades of San Andreas' Johnson brothers after Sweet gets out of jail here. And while I've made my opinion on that scenario clear in the past, I can't help but feel more pulled towards Franklin's perspective on this one. I mean, I'm all for looking after your homies and lending a hand to your friends who need help, but that's only if they're willing to become better and stop getting themselves into those positions to begin with. Otherwise, you risk enabling a person to become complacent, because they'll think you'll always be there to bail them out, no matter the cost to yourself. Of course, this situation has higher stakes than the typical one I've just described, seeing as how Lamar's life is on the line, but to be completely honest, I still feel Franklin would have been justified had he left Lamar to die given how much he's tried to drag him back down into the gang life. Still though, our protagonist ultimately gives in to Tanisha's request and makes the trek up to Paleto Bay where he meets with our other two protagonists to find a sawmill littered with ballas and a lone Lamar being held captive. Of course, Michael and Trevor are still on bad terms at this point, but despite their childish bickering, our trio manages to recover Lamar and bring him to safety. Once he's with us, Franklin and Lamar have a long talk where our protagonist finally gets it through his friend's thick-ass skull that Stretch has been trying to clap them both. Though during this talk, Lamar isn't shy about letting some of his resentment towards Franklin's advancement of the criminal totem pole slip through. He then continues showing his resentment after we drop him off and give him a few $100 to help him get by, which he interprets as us finally paying him for helping with the cars. That's when Franklin snaps back, telling Lamar that nobody got paid for those cars and implies that he should be grateful for us saving his useless ass as many times as we have. In the end, our protagonist tries to give his friend some advice to help him get out of the hood, which Lamar rejects as he seems to interpret such an idea as disrespect to his culture. Following the two's brief fight, Franklin goes to leave when he's intercepted by Dave and Steve Haynes, who seem to be back on the same page. Together, they inform us that they're going to need Franklin to eliminate Trevor when the time is right because he's become an untamable liability, thus beginning to set the finale of this story into motion. Before we can get there though, we've still got one big score to settle. For this job, we have two options on how to approach the Union Depository. We can either go in subtly, disguised as guards, and have them give us all $200 million worth of their gold, or we can go the more obvious route where we take that gold by force. Should we choose the subtle approach, we'll acquire some spike strips from the police and use them to force the UD's transport to a halt. Then as our team replaces the truck's tires, Michael, Trevor, and a gunman will take one of the workers hostage and go with him to collect the gold. Once it's packed into the back of our trucks, we'll begin taking the metal to the rest of the team stationed near the strip club. However, it's at this time that Merriweather somehow catches wind of our plans and begins to track us down, leading to a unique minigame where Franklin hacks into Los Santos' traffic lights to help get the crew home and keep the mercenaries off our scent. After the gold has been transported, the team starts to pack it into a few muscle cars that we modified, which we'll use to get out of town. Meanwhile, Michael deals with a loose end that is our hostage by paying him off with a brick. However, again, Merriweather somehow still finds us, leading to the only gunfight in this version of the heist where most of our crew have to fend them off while the rest of the crew continue packing. Once the mercs have been dealt with, our trio of protagonists along with the driver race through the city to evade the police, ultimately escaping them by packing the cars into a couple of semis while we're out of the cops' view. Following our escape, our trio leave the gold with the crew to complete the delivery while we make our way back to Michael's house to debrief with Lester. On the way, Michael and Trevor get back to their childish bickering while Franklin tries to play peacekeeper. Annoyingly, the arguing persists to the point where even Lester gets fed up and dares to talk shit about the West Coast, which Franklin uncharacteristically takes offense to.
What the fuck is wrong with the West Coast?
As tensions only continue to rise, Franklin gets pissed and storms off, ending what should have been the group's biggest high on the bitterest note. This is a fun enough version of the heist, and it's definitely a logically sensible approach to be taken by a heist crew as experienced as ours. But my only real issue with it is that it feels pretty anticlimactic for this to be the so-called big one Michael and Trevor have been referring to, given how little action there is in it. Again, don't get me wrong, it makes sense if our crew chooses to go this route given how seasoned they are. But after all the action we've gone through up to this point in the game, and just in the other heists alone for that matter, it doesn't feel right for the final heist to be as calm as it is. Plus, the way it ends with all of our protagonists getting into a shouting match when they should have been celebrating pulling off the impossible, it all just doesn't feel right. Of course, I'm not expecting Michael and Trevor to sing Kumbaya after everything they've recently been through together, but I don't think the ending cutscene needs to be as negative as it is. All in all, I just don't feel that the final heist of the game that's been hyped up for most of the second half of the game should go the way it does in this version. But luckily, there's still another approach we can take instead. In the alternate version of this heist, Michael takes a gunman to rob the bank at its front door. However, these two are merely the distraction. The real heist is going on downstairs where Franklin uses a boring machine that we stole to drill into the vault of the Union Depository. Once we're in, our gunman starts to move the gold into a couple of cages while we defend him from the responding news team. After it's all been secured, Trevor and a driver fly in with a pair of helicopters to pick up the gold and carry it out of Los Santos. Meanwhile, outside the bank, Franklin meets up with Michael and his gunman to flee the scene while fighting our way through heavy police forces on foot. Following this extensive shootout, we eventually reach our getaway car and make our escape. Once we're in the clear, we switch back to Trevor, who is being pursued by Merriweather through the skies. While we fly through the windmill farm to try to evade them, Lester fires rockets at them from the back of our chopper, taking them out one by one until we're home free. Afterwards, our pair of pilots drop the gold onto a train we stole earlier and head up to the airfield to conclude the heist. Then following a debrief with the rest of the crew, Michael and Trevor go with Lester to handle the gold while Franklin is free to return to LS, ending the heist on a much higher note than his subtle counterparts. Now you see this? This is what I call a heist. From its lengthy shootouts to its tense chase across the sky to its unscripted escape from the police, this feels like a heist that's worthy of being called the big one. This felt like something worthy of the buildup that had taken place across the past several hours of the story, and the much more amicable ending sits a lot better with me than the end of the subtle approach. Of course, there is still a bit of hostility between Michael and Trevor at the end of this version, but tensions don't escalate anywhere near the level that they did in the other one. Overall, this heist is packed with enough action to make it worth playing through the rest of the story, and in spite of the lingering bitterness between two of our protagonists, it still feels good to survive this raid on the Union Depository. But as climactic as this big one was, the story isn't quite over yet. As Franklin relaxes in his house after taking that huge score, he gets an unexpected knock at the door. I wonder who it could be.
Hey, Slick, it's me!
Devin fucking Weston. Devin fucking Weston is here, and he's here because he wants to give us one last job: to kill Michael. After everything Michael's done recently to disrupt Devin's business interests, he wants him gone, and the best way he sees of completing this task is to pass it off to the guy he'd earlier tried to convince was being held back by the man he wants eliminated. Of course, Franklin has already been contacted by the FIB to kill Trevor, and while he doesn't want to kill either of his friends, he definitely knows he can't kill them both. Ultimately, Devin simplifies our predicament into 3 options. We can either A, listen to Steve Haynes and exterminate Trevor, B, listen to Devin Weston and take out Michael, or C, stick to our guns and try to save them both at the risk of everybody dying. After Franklin kicks Devin out of his house, the time comes for us, the player, to make that decision. Up to this point in the game, we've had numerous choices to make, be it how we wanted to approach a heist, whether we wanted to kill or spare an inconsequential character, or even if we wanted to sell some travelers to a cult of cannibals. But in the grand scheme, none of those decisions had any real impact on our protagonists, or really on the story in general. This choice, however, directly decides how the story of Grand Theft Auto 5 will end. So let's go over each of these choices and talk about the endings they lead us to. In option A, Franklin calls Trevor to ask him if they can meet somewhere quiet to talk. After they settle on a place, Franklin then calls Michael to tell him the situation, and that he's decided that if someone has to go, it ought to be Trevor. He then asks for help with the situation, to which Michael responds with a pretty vague maybe. With that, we set out to meet Trevor on the outskirts of town, and as soon as our target arrives, we can sense that he has an idea of what this is about, judging by how he stays near his truck in case his suspicions are true. Before long, Franklin pulls his gun, and after he processes this betrayal, Trevor calls us a Judas as he drives off. I find it interesting, by the way, that this is how Trevor handles the situation, considering that if it were anybody else holding him at gunpoint, he likely would have turned the tables and killed them. But the fact that it's Franklin, somebody he trusted and had become good friends with throughout the course of the story, this is a situation he isn't prepared to handle, so he tries to run away from it. He doesn't want to kill us, so he tries to not have to. Similar to how he didn't want to kill Michael back in North Yankton in the mission Bury the Hatchets, but was perfectly fine with fleeing to leave his betrayer at the mercy of the Triads. Sure, you could argue that Trevor knows how capable Franklin is and is therefore less willing to fight him, but given our understanding of his psyche, I find the former theory to be the more realistic one. Nevertheless, after Trevor takes off, we chase him down the highway until Michael calls us back to tell us that he'll be joining us soon. This brings us to the oil fields, where Michael makes his presence known by T-boning Trevor into a tanker full of gasoline, causing it to spill out onto the ground and soak him. As Trevor then crawls in the puddle of gas, he angrily, hopelessly, and defeatedly spews out one last mental breakdown as he calls the other 2 protagonists Judases. Having been betrayed too many times, he yells at us to take the fucking shot, which we do to ignite the gasoline and light him on fire. We then watch as Trevor agonizingly burns to death until his screams of pain cease, at which point the tanker explodes to confirm his death. With Trevor having been put out of his misery, Michael and Franklin storm away from the scene while the former angrily tries to justify his decision to help kill him. Once it's all said and done, the mentor gives his protege one last lesson, telling him that surviving is winning. They survived, and they did so by any means necessary, even if they had to kill Michael's best friend. They did whatever it takes to survive, and therefore, they've won. After they split up, Franklin takes a second to process that advice and eventually agrees, proving that Trevor was right in the fact that they were both Judases willing to do anything to save themselves. At that, Franklin walks off as the camera zooms out to show Los Santos glow against the night sky while the credits begin to roll, concluding our first of the 3 endings. Though that's not entirely it quite yet, because we've still got a post-mission phone call where Steve Haynes calls Franklin to patronizingly tell us well done before cutting us loose. Let's now rewind back to the beginning of the finale to see what happens if we choose option B. If we decide to kill Michael, Franklin will call him up and similarly ask him to talk somewhere quiet. Once they settle on a place, we call Trevor to catch him up to speed. But unlike Michael in the first ending, Trevor is confused as to why we're telling him this, and when we ask him for help, he angrily calls us a traitor and refuses to give his assistance. Anyway, now that we know we'll have to go it alone, our 2 protagonists meet out near the desert. But just before they can start talking, Michael's wife calls him to give him the news that their daughter is going to college. Elated by this, Michael excitedly talks to us about how happy he's been with having his family back and having a job that he loves. And he even tells us that Amanda wants to invite us over for dinner soon. He proudly talks about how the 2 of us have made it, and how we did it together. But that's when the conversation takes a sour turn. Franklin starts giving Michael a speech about how it's not over, at which point our rich dad pieces together that his black son has turned on him and makes a break for it. Following a car chase to the power station, we continue following him on foot while he takes the occasional pot shot at us. Before long, the chase leads us up to this tower where Michael gets the jump on us in a real teacher versus student moment. But after Franklin creates some distance, he manages to turn the tables and even up the odds by disarming Michael. Knowing he's outmatched physically, Eventually, Michael stops trying to fight Franklin and instead takes the time to make us feel horrible for making this call. We soon hear enough and shove Michael over the railing, but we manage to catch him and receive the option to either drop him or pull him back up. As we let him dangle, Franklin explains to Michael that he finally understands why the latter sold out Trevor and Brad back in North Yankton. After we saved him from the triads, Michael told us that we would understand it one day, and today is that day. Regardless of the choice we make, Michael ends up falling to his death, and as the camera cuts to his corpse, the choice really sinks in for the player that we've just killed Michael, and the silence that follows helps us process that there's no going back. While the ending in which Trevor died at least allowed us to reflect on things with a fellow protagonist, we already know that our fellow protagonist in this ending hates us, and therefore, we have no one to help us justify this decision. Sure, Franklin still has Lamar, but by eliminating Michael, he's lost both of the brothers in arms he'd become close with throughout the story. Speaking of Lamar, once the job is done, Franklin gives him a call that goes to voicemail, and he leaves a message where he asks if he wants to hang out soon. What's significant about this message, though, is that he ends it with a speech that's very similar to the one that Michael gave him to justify his betrayal of Trevor and Brad, proving to us that Franklin does indeed understand why his mentor did what he did, but more importantly, signifying once and for all that he has become Michael, albeit a black version of him. Anyway, as the voice message ends, the camera pans up towards the night sky while the credits begin rolling. Then, just to rub salt in the wound, Franklin receives a call from Devin Weston to make sure the job is done. And after we ask about any future work, the man who not so long ago was telling us how we were being held back by our older accomplices, he informs us that we've exhausted our usefulness and abandons us. Man, what a dick. There's a couple of key differences between these two endings that I'd like to go over real quick. The first of which is obvious, being that while Michael was willing to help Franklin put down Trevor, Trevor flat out refused to assist Franklin in taking out Michael. He's made it clear up to this point that he cannot stand betrayal, so it's not shocking that his reasoning for not helping us is because he'd be enabling someone he cares about to become something he hates, and he continues to make it clear in the aftermath of this story through his emails. Additionally, while Trevor simply tries to escape Franklin in the ending where he dies, Michael actively tries to kill Franklin before Franklin can kill him, showing yet another difference between the two aged protagonists, as Michael characteristically tries to save his own skin by any means necessary, whereas Trevor would rather die than survive by going against his principles. Plus, while Michael is running away, he suggests to Franklin that they could still work together to kill Trevor, which is an idea that Trevor doesn't even consider offering the equivalence of in the alternate ending. One last thing I'd like to reiterate about these two endings is that while Franklin gets to continue living alongside Michael in the ending where Trevor dies, he's all alone in the ending where Michael dies. In both endings, Franklin lives on as Michael's graduate who used the teachings of his mentor to survive, but in the ending where he had to kill his mentor, he truly has to live in a similar fashion to him, where he goes on with his life knowing he'd betrayed everyone who helped him get to where he is. With everything said, if I had to pick which one of these two endings I liked better, I'd probably have to go with ending B. I say this because this ending knows exactly how to make you feel like a piece of shit by showcasing Michael's happiness and his pride in Franklin at the beginning of their encounter, only to replace these pleasant feelings with ones of guilt throughout the mission, and ultimately dread by the time you complete it. In the ending where Trevor dies, you have Michael there to tell you that his death was for the greater good, but in this ending, you have no one to make you feel better about yourself. You just have the view of Michael's dead body accompanied by the near-dead silence with which you must process your own actions. Then, of course, when Franklin calls Lamar, it's nothing short of poetic how we tell him the same thing that Michael had told us once upon a time. All in all, this ending makes you feel awful if you've gained any attachment to this story's characters, and that's exactly why I love it so much more than the alternative. And let's face it, neither of these two endings are good. You just have one that's bad and one that's worse, similar to how GTA 4 has two bad endings and nothing more. But unlike this game's predecessor, there actually exists a third ending that finishes the game on a high note. That brings us to option C. No, not that option C. This option C sees us call Lester to meet him someplace quiet. Wait, no, sorry, the other ending's got me kind of fucked up. We actually call Lester because we need some advice on how to handle things. Following a drive to his house, we inform him of the situation. At first, Lester shows us how dire things truly are when the best plan that he can think of is to simply ice both of the other protagonists. But after some brainstorming, the crippled computer, wait, that's actually a pretty fucking sweet nickname. I don't know if anybody else has ever called him that, but that is officially my new name for Lester. Anyway, the crippled computer eventually comes up with a master plan to lure Steve Haynes and Devin Weston's forces into an isolated area from where we can wipe them all out. Then, once the two's defenses are weakened, we'll go after the two head honchos themselves and eliminate them once and for all. With the plan set, Lester contacts Trevor and Michael to get them down to the foundry, and then leaks to the FIB and Merryweather that that's where the gold from the Union Depository heist is being melted down at. Meanwhile, Franklin decides that we need all hands on deck, so he gives Lamar the chance to finally prove his usefulness by coming along with us to help us out. When we arrive at the foundry, we drop Lamar off outside to keep watch, while we go inside to find Michael and Trevor at each other's throats as usual. But with the heat closing in, Franklin convinces the two to set their differences aside and take positions. This leads us into a fun shootout where all three of our protagonists lock the foundry down against the invading Noose and Merryweather forces. Before long, Lamar gets spotted, forcing Franklin to split from the trio and help his homie fend off Noose. At some point, Trevor goes down inside the building, which means it's up to Michael to regroup with him and help him against their attackers. Once the two of them have cleared the inside of the building, they join Franklin outside to wipe out the remainder of Noose and Merryweather. After the foundry has been secured, our team gets together and calls Lester to find out the locations of their antagonists and deal with all of them appropriately. Ultimately, the hit list they compile consists of Stretch, Wei Chang, Steve Haynes, and Devin Weston, the last of which Lester is unable to immediately track down. As for the rest of them, each of our protagonists select a target and swiftly wipe them out, with Michael killing Stretch, Franklin killing Chang, and Trevor killing Haynes. Now, I like this format for what it is, with all of our main characters taking out each of their main villains, but the issue I have here is how they mostly go after the ones that they have the least beef with. It's pretty clear by this point that Stretch is the main antagonist of Franklin's story, considering all the crap the OG subjects him and Lamar to. But rather than have the appropriate man deal with him, Michael is instead the one to cap him. The in-universe reason for this is so that Stretch's death doesn't get traced back to Franklin. But in the same universe where our band of bank robbers have gone on national TV after having their faces be exposed during previous bank robberies, and that's just to name one example, why is it just now that we suddenly care about realism? Hell, even Trevor could have had a valid enough reason to want to kill Stretch since he had seen firsthand how he set up Franklin and Lamar. So for Michael to be the one to kill him still, despite that, is just weird to me. Additionally, since Michael and Trevor have already picked their targets by the time Wei Chang's location becomes available, Franklin ends up being the one who takes him out. You know, Franklin, the guy who didn't fuck up the Triad's business ventures and wasn't hung up on a meat hook to be killed. Yeah, he ends up being the one to kill Chang. Sure, Franklin killed a few of his goons when he was saving Michael, but he still has the least amount of reason to be the one who kills him when compared to the other two protagonists. Again, this mixing and matching of the protagonists to their antagonists, it just doesn't make sense to me. And ultimately, the narrative suffers for it. The only one of these confrontations that actually makes some sense is Trevor's assassination of Steve Haynes. But that's only because Haynes was an antagonistic force to all three of our protagonists. Even still, I feel like he should have been killed by Michael if anything, since he was more of a main villain for him than the others. Regardless of who the antagonists were killed by though, two of them felt pretty anticlimactic all things considered. With Stretch, he just gets killed in a basic shootout against the Ballas. And it's pretty much the same situation with Chang. No cutscenes or anything, just popped and dropped. As for Haynes, he at least gets a more proper send-off with a brief cutscene of him recording his show, completely unaware that there's a sniper scope on him. And then his death itself utilizes a pretty cool effect before we get one more cutscene where we see his lifeless body on the floor while his cameraman reacts to the incident. Anyway, with the other three antagonists taken care of, the time comes to eliminate Devin Weston, who is blissfully waiting to hear back from his team at the foundry while a small Merryweather unit guards his house. After a quick shootout with them, Trevor knocks Devin out, kidnaps him, and begins to transport him upstate as I Wouldn't Wanna Be Like You by the Alan Parsons Project appropriately plays in the background. Eventually, Devin wakes up and desperately pleads from the trunk for Trevor to let him go. Once he realizes his efforts are fruitless, he breaks the facade and swears he'll find a way out of this. And I have to admit, it's nice to hear this rich fuck who always gets his way finally feel what it's like to not be in control. Soon, we deliver Devin up to the coast where we rendezvous with the other protagonists, at which point we open the trunk to taunt him.
Hey, my bad, homie. I picked C. Ain't that a bitch?
After one last monologue from Michael, we close the trunk up, and altogether, our three heroes push the last remaining villain off the cliff. Following a closing dialogue between the three, Michael and Franklin drive off, leaving Trevor to walk home. Fucking assholes, by the way. While the camera cuts to the beautiful San Andreas sunset as the credits roll. Needless to say, this is the ending that I like the most, and clearly Rockstar does as well, seeing as how they've pretty much canonized it through GTA Online's story. Although, even this ending isn't without its hiccups. I've already talked about my issues with how I believe each of the first three antagonists are killed by the wrong guy, but I'm going to take it a step further now and say that I don't think that Devin Weston should have been the ultimate main antagonist who gets killed at the very end. No, I believe that honor should have gone to Steve Haynes because I feel he was much more impactful against our heroes throughout the bulk of the story. Yes, Devin did screw all of our protagonists out of their payments for the cars, and yes, he did send Merryweather to kill Michael and his family, but that's all he really did. Steve, on the other hand, repeatedly blackmailed all three of our guys into doing the FIB's dirty work, be it by breaking into the IAA and kidnapping a guy, FBI, by forcing us to take on the entire LSPD to steal the IAA's funds, by forcing us to take on the entire BCSO and the Army just to buy a frickin' helicopter. Should I go on? Because I can go on. Point being, Haynes has consistently been a thorn in the side of all three of our protagonists throughout the course of the story. So for Devin Weston to be considered the main antagonist over him is just another strange decision to me. Another issue I take with this ending is how Trevor and Michael just forgive each other once it's all over. When I was researching this part of the video at first, I thought maybe that Michael coming over to check on Trevor inside the foundry was supposed to be some sort of subtle heart-to-heart between them that made them get over their past issues. But considering how they're still at each other's throats even after they survive Noose and Merryweather, it's got me wondering exactly what significant events could have occurred between then and Devin Weston's death that made them forgive each other. Maybe it was their taunting over Devin in the trunk that brought them together, or just watching Devin explode in the car. But either way, the fact that they're over it all out of nowhere like this just feels like lazy writing to me. It's as if the writers set up this conflict between them in order to get the other endings to feel more realistic, but they just couldn't figure out a good payoff to that conflict in this ending. So they ended up taking the easy way out by just saying that everybody loves each other again. Still though, even with these annoyances, I find this ending to be the best one, as I'm sure that plenty of others do as well. After all, it's the only ending where all three of our heroes survive. They do so without having to give in to past evils, and they all remain friends afterwards. Then once it's all over, we can engage in a few phone calls from various characters. But my favorite one by far is this one with Solomon Richards, where he gives us an all too familiar movie quote.
We forget 1,000 things every day. Can't we just make this one of them?
What a spectacular way to cap everything off. All in all, it's a great feel-good ending that greatly contrasts the much darker and depressing endings of GTA 4. And while I'm sure that there are some players who prefer the way Nico Bellic's story ends over the conclusions of Franklin, Michael, and Trevor's stories, I, for one, am not against Grand Theft Auto returning to its more lighthearted roots by featuring a finale that doesn't leave you feeling cold and broken inside. Similarly, as much as I love GTA 4's story for its darkness and grittiness, and just for how honest and real it feels, I also thoroughly enjoy the wackiness and excitement that GTA 5's story provides. I know a lot of people will drag 5 through the mud for a variety of reasons, one of which being for how unrealistic and over the top the story is, but I, for one, appreciate it for what it is, and I have no issue with a video game treating itself like a video game. However, that's not to say it's perfect. One more issue I do feel I have to bring up is the blessing and curse that comes with having 3 protagonists of one story. As unique and cool as it is to have such a system, the major downside that I believe having 3 main characters brings is a lack of focus in the story. When we first open up this game and enter the prologue, it starts off as a story about Michael and Trevor, but when we get into our first real mission of the game, it becomes a story about Franklin. This itself I have no problem with, and I personally enjoyed my time playing the beginning of Franklin's story. But for me, the issues arise when Franklin's story starts to take a major backseat to Michael's. After the long stretch, Franklin doesn't start getting missions of his own again until around the time that Michael loses his family. That is a major chunk of the game without any real development for one of our main characters. And it's because Michael and Trevor's stories take center stage here. Michael is the one who has to repay Martin Madrazo, so he's the one who has to get back into heisting, and while he brings Franklin along with him, the younger protagonist pretty much turns into a supporting character during this portion of the game. Then, after we unlock Trevor and spend a while taking over Sandy Shores, he also more or less becomes a supporting character in Michael's story too. Sure, he has his whole Merryweather heist stuff, but other than that, he and Franklin are relegated to helping Michael help the FIB. Franklin doesn't really start getting the spotlight back until he takes charge in getting those cars for Devin Weston, and even then, he's just kind of doing it in the background while the real story of Michael and Trevor continues to unfold. Then our next heist only happens because of Michael's connections with the FIB, plans for the big one only get put into motion because Michael wants to go home, the next heist also only happens because of Michael's FIB situation, and so on. Sure, Franklin and Trevor get their moments of shine here and there, but the majority of this story feels like it's been centered around Michael. It's only when Lamar gets in trouble at the sawmill that Franklin starts feeling like a main character again as he directs the other 2 protagonists in how to help him. But Michael is still the one who needs to reunite his family. Michael is still the one who's making a movie. Michael is still the one who's dealing with the FIB. It's only after the Union Depository heist that Franklin suddenly becomes more than a supporting character again, when the writers just randomly decide that he's the main character and he needs to choose who to kill. This whole deal with 3 protagonists, it all feels so disorganized, and it lacks the direction that previous games and even future ones possessed. Hopefully, GTA 6 is able to better manage its 2 protagonists, but narratively speaking, 3 seem to be too many for GTA 5. But while there are plenty of things wrong with GTA 5's story, and while there's quite a few issues that I personally take with its creative decisions, I overall still find it a fun game to experience, no matter how you carve it up. Hell, if I didn't think that was the case, I wouldn't have spent over 40 hours on my most recent playthrough of it. From its missions, to its innovative heists, to its interesting characters, I believe GTA 5 has plenty of reasons why you should be able to enjoy its story. And for how much I've talked about its story over the past, hour, I think it's now time to mildly shift our focus and hone in on one of those reasons. I think I've made it pretty clear so far that I enjoy the story of Grand Theft Auto 5, but every story is only as good as its characters, and with as many characters as this game has, I figured it was only right to dedicate a separate chapter to talk about a fair few of them. In this section of the video, I'll be going over all 3 of our protagonists, each of their antagonists, as well as some of their close allies that I feel deserve a mention. First things first, let's start off with our mainest of our 3 main characters, Michael. I call him the mainest character because, let's face it, it's his story that primarily drives the plot, and I feel that the stories of our other protagonists more so revolve around him than vice versa. Either way, to describe him bluntly, Michael is a bitter man with anger issues, and once upon a time, he was also a talented thief. Additionally, it's undeniable that he's a survivalist who will do anything it takes to keep himself and his family alive, even though he shows in the beginning of the story that he's an ungrateful patriarch. He makes it very clear through his words and actions that he isn't proud of the son he raised, nor is he happy with the wife he married, and it's only after he loses them that he realizes how much he needs his family in his life. When they're out of the picture, Michael's life goes through a couple of highs and lows as he gets the chance to work his dream job, only to be deprived of said opportunity when Trevor forces him into exile, where his anger is put on full display as he gets into several screaming matches with the other protagonist. We don't have to wait too long to see him bounce back from his worst though, because when he gets back to Los Santos, not only does he resume working at the movie studio, but he also reunites his family by showing civility to his son, properly protecting his daughter, and standing up for his wife before getting into one last screaming match with her to burn off presumably 20 or so years of tension. With that, Michael's character arc of learning to appreciate his family and becoming a decent father and husband is complete, and he goes on to cement this all when he defends his family against Merryweather. But as much of a feel-good story that this turns out to be when you distract yourself with 2 other stories taking place simultaneously, I feel that the story of Michael DeSanta ends up falling short when you isolate it. Don't get me wrong, it's a good story on paper, but when you fail to show any proper growth inside your protagonist, perhaps by featuring a mission or 2 where he learns to manage his anger better for example, the whole thing falls apart. Instead of showing us that Michael has learned not to take his family for granted, Rockstar tells us by having him make the claim that he misses them so often that one of the other protagonists even calls bullshit on him.
I miss my family! Oh, you're full of shit!
You could make the argument that working for Solomon is what made Michael change. And while I agree that this new career gave him a new lease on life, I don't buy that he suddenly learned how to be a good dad just because he likes his job. All in all, I just feel that his character arc wasn't properly executed, but given how I only feel this way when I examine his story under a microscope, I'm willing to excuse this blight since I clearly enjoy the story overall when it's blended back into everything. One more thing I'd like to talk about regarding Michael is his narcissistic and egotistical view of himself in the world. Through our early interactions with him, he makes it clear how much of a movie guy he is, so it shouldn't be much of a surprise that, for better or worse, he sees himself as the main character. He even goes as far as to confess to his therapist that he's always thought of himself as the good guy, which is a pretty crazy take considering all of the immoral acts that he not only commits through the duration of the story, but even before the prologue as well. However, as insane as this viewpoint may seem, I think I can kind of understand it. I know I just called this view narcissistic and egotistical, but honestly, this is the same view that I have of myself, and I can't blame others for having that view as well. From my perspective, I'm the main character of my own story. I am my own protagonist, just as I believe you should be yours. That being said, I don't believe this type of complex should give you a free pass to do whatever the hell you want to benefit yourself. And by that same logic, I don't think Michael should give himself a free pass to betray his friends, hate his family, kill hundreds of people, rob anybody blind, and so on just because he's his own main character. But because he seemingly does and still considers himself the good guy, that's where the narcissism and egotism mainly comes in. At the same time though, by the end of his character arc, he's shown numerous times that his willingness to commit evils is to bring good to the people he cares about, so I wouldn't exactly consider him the bad guy by any means either. In the end, I think the reality Michael needs to face is that he isn't a hero, he's an anti-hero. But you know a guy who makes no claim at being a hero? Everybody's favorite, mentally deranged, meth-dealing psychopath, Trevor. But while he may perhaps be the furthest thing possible from a hero, what I think makes our boy here so interesting is the moral code he seems to live by despite the reprehensible atrocities he frequently takes part in. At his core, Trevor is a similarly angry being who isn't afraid to take advantage of those he finds useful and toss aside those in his way. Much like Michael has his family, Trevor has his lackeys, Wade and Ron, who he intimidates into following his orders through threats or acts of violence. When we first unlock Trevor, he mostly uses these two as henchmen to help him during his attacks on the rival gangs of Sandy Shores. And given how easy it is for him to push them over, he doesn't hesitate to do so when given the chance. However, if his allies are not only competent but also confident, he doesn't hesitate to show them respect, as he does with Chef, his meth cook who helps him fend off the Aztecas, as well as Michael, Franklin, and even Lamar after he gets into the mix with them. That's enough about his relationships though. What about that moral code of his I spoke of a minute ago? Well, as abhorrent of a person as Trevor may be, he still probably looks at himself as a morally righteous being, as he is loyal to a fault, and he views the act of betrayal as the greatest sin a man can commit. The first taste of this character trait that we get is in the hatred he feels towards Michael after he pieces together the puzzle of their past and confirms Brad's death. The fact that one of his best friends could have his other best friend killed, and then went off to avoid the consequences of such an act for nearly a decade, even though he's probably acquired a much worse rap sheet across that time that ranges from basic slaughter to trafficking people to cannibals to actual cannibalism, and those are just some of the worst crimes I can think of at this moment. Either way, despite his own sins, he sees Michael's decision as the ultimate cardinal sin based on his own morality, which isn't the most reasonable perspective when you look at the grand scheme. And look, I'm not trying to defend Michael's choices or anything, but I'm just saying that I don't think Trevor is really in any position to judge someone else's character so harshly, especially if they may have done it for a valid enough reason like protecting their family. Speaking of the specific act of betrayal, I'd like to point out that while Trevor could have easily shot and killed Michael during Bury the Hatchet, his inaction to do so, as well as his demanding to Michael to pull the trigger, contradicted by his abandonment of Michael after the arrival of the Triads and subsequent decision to leave him for dead during his phone call with Wei Chang, this whole scenario tells me that in spite of the hatred he feels for his former friend, he still can't bring himself to be the one who ends somebody he deeply cared about. And I think this is because he believes he'd see this as his own act of betrayal. That being said, if Michael were to die at the hands of the Triads, well, that's outside of his domain. So if he can see Michael dead while staying true to his principles, then in his mind, he's off the hook, unlike Michael. There's two other instances of betrayal that I want to go over here. The first of which is more of a theoretical instance, but it's still something that I want to at least visit. After Trevor returns to Floyd's apartment following his exile, he finds Floyd's girlfriend Deborah there with him and tries to continue living there in his own weird way.
Will you marry me?
However, Deborah isn't so receptive to the idea, as she repeatedly demands that Trevor leave, and then demands the same of Floyd before getting so frustrated that she pulls a gun on them both. Floyd equips a knife in response, and it's at this point that Trevor's demeanor completely shifts. After seeing a man that he viewed as his ally, as well as his girlfriend that he had tried to work with too, dare to threaten his life, our protagonist feels betrayed yet again. Thus, we see the aftermath of the monster's wrath at the start of the following cutscene. It's also in this cutscene that Wade shows up, and I think it's at this time that Trevor realizes what he's done to his lackey by killing his cousin. He's become the thing that he hates, a traitor. But since what's done is done, Trevor does what he can to rectify the situation by taking Wade to the strip club to occupy him with some of its ladies, assuring his lackey that Floyd will join them there soon. Of course, our protagonist easily could have allowed Wade to uncover the truth, or he could have just flat out killed him since he was no longer useful. But I think the route Trevor chooses to go down here shows us that he's not only remorseful for his actions because of how they'll affect Wade, but this care he shows for him proves that he isn't someone he wants to hurt in such a way. The last time Trevor's views on treachery come into play is during the story's finale, or at least during two of them. As I talked about earlier, ending A, where Trevor dies, reiterates the fact that even when this protagonist is being betrayed by someone he cares deeply for, he isn't willing to pursue revenge himself because he couldn't live with himself if he did. As a matter of fact, he proves that he would rather die than become what he hates, which is why he avoids facing Franklin head on and instead yells at us to finish him off when he's bathed in gasoline. Additionally, in ending B, Trevor shows that his hatred of traitors goes beyond those who betray him, because when Franklin calls him to let him know that he's about to kill Michael, Trevor vocally disapproves of the choice despite his own negative feelings towards Michael at the time. Then after the deed is done, Trevor tells Franklin that he wants nothing to do with him. Say what you want about Trevor, and there's a lot you can say about him, but you honestly do have to respect the fact that he's a man of principle at the end of the day. But he's also proven himself to be a man of culture, and if you've seen a few of my past retrospective videos, you'll know one thing that I like to give characters bonus points for is how memorable they've made themselves through their antics. Much like how Big Smoke in San Andreas has been the center of plenty of memes like the fast food order or the damn train, Trevor has a few iconic moments of his own. One that's gotten popular in recent years was the cutscene where he reveals he kidnapped the wife of Martin Madrazo, and there's also a scene where Trevor trips over a fence that garnered attention for how improvised it felt. But he's also got so many other hilarious moments throughout this game. There's the famous Scooter Brothers character switch. We have this cutscene where he nonchalantly eats what's likely human stew and then throws it up afterwards. There's this moment where he just starts strangling this elderly Brit until he gets attacked with the purse of this other elderly Brit, and that's just to name a few. There's dozens, if not hundreds, of other examples of Trevor being a walking meme, but I'd like to hope you get the point by now. Anyway, on the topic of memes, we've still got one last protagonist to go over, so let's now shine the spotlight onto the man with the yee-yee-ass haircut, Franklin. Unlike the other two protagonists, he's not nearly as hot-headed and is actually the most rational out of the three, as opposed to Michael, who lets his anger cloud his judgment a lot of the time, and Trevor, who more so uses his anger to fuel his progression. Franklin usually just gets annoyed when interacting with the people he believes are holding him back, or he'll only get mad when he feels he's being screwed over. Other than that, he usually comes off as pretty chill, if not a bit cocky and sarcastic, which might be partially why he gets along with Michael so well. Speaking of Michael, while the former protagonist we've talked about has a character arc that takes place rather gradually throughout the course of the game, Franklin's arc of rising from a lowly gangbanger to a successful leader is much more of a stop-start mess. His story starts off strong enough as the game shows that he lives in the hood with his aunt and works a standard job with his friend, and I respect how quickly it's made clear that he desires to find a way to climb out of poverty and up to prosperity. However, as I've gone over already, as soon as Michael enters the picture, GTA 5 becomes the Michael DeSantis story, and it feels like we only get to play Franklin's story whenever Michael's needs a break. Sure, we are able to play a couple of missions after we unlock our second protagonist, but the one where we meet Stretch is literally the last Franklin-centric mission until about halfway through the game when Trevor tags along with him to buy some coke. At least Franklin's story is somewhat progressed in the background, as his involvement in the jewel store heist shows a clear advancement for him up the criminal ladder, but again, this is more of a side effect of Michael's story than anything. On the plus side, I will say that the change of scenery in Franklin's career is reflected properly, since he no longer has to resort to petty gangbanging to make cash after he moves into his house in the hills. Rather, from here on, Franklin's only involvement in criminality revolves around pulling heists and stealing high-end cars alongside our other protagonists. But it's during this point of the story that Franklin's arc stagnates again. Yes, he does see progression when he's pretty much put in charge of acquiring the cars for Devin Weston, but there's such a long period of time here where he just doesn't get the chance to grow because the spotlight is on Trevor and Michael instead. It's not like he consistently holds on to this leadership position either, because he temporarily surrenders it back to Michael when it comes time to raid the FIB, and he doesn't exactly take the reins back during the Uni Depository heist either. At least he gets the chance to show off his chops once again when he gathers the others to help him save Lamar, but I don't feel like he's been built up enough as a leader by the time he's tasked with choosing who to kill at the end of the game. Rather, it feels like the writers couldn't properly work the story out to where Franklin could be Michael's protege while also becoming the leader he was driven to be. So we instead get this choppy mess where he's one sometimes and the other when it's convenient. Hell, even in Ending C, where Franklin works with Lester to come up with a game plan, once he's finished guiding the other protagonists to their survival, he ends up being tasked with taking out one of the game's weaker villains, and goes on to be the third most relevant protagonist of the final cutscene. Seriously, it's like the writers wanted this to be Franklin's story, but they were way more passionate about telling Michael's story, and that passion ended up diminishing this one. That's my take on it all, at least. But outside of Franklin's character arc, there's one persistent character trait of his that I'd like to give some time to, and that's his drive to beat the game of life. While he may not have gotten the time in the sun that I feel he should have, one thing I can happily say is that whenever Franklin is given attention, he consistently expresses his desire to move up in the world, and he isn't shy about vocalizing his disappointment when he can't. Right from the start of the story, Franklin exposits that he is stuck in life and needs to find a way to break through the glass ceiling. He's quick to make this claim to Simeon, and in the mission Chop, he tells Lamar that he isn't interested in low-life gangbanging anymore as the pay isn't even worth the risk. And of course, this rings true since all the effort our protagonist puts into kidnapping that Bala ends up being for naught. And we find a similar outcome in the following mission when what was supposed to be a simple drug deal turns into a shootout with the Balas and the cops. In this mission as well, Franklin complains to Stretch that the current gang hierarchy is nothing but a scam, and because of that, he and Lamar are getting out so they can make some real paper. Finally, after performing that first heist with Michael, Franklin gratefully expresses that it made him way more cash than gangbanging ever did. Contrarily, however, after the failure that was the Merryweather heist, he goes on to make a passing comment about how he's not getting paid for his work. And this trend is exemplified further when that drug deal alongside Lamar and Trevor turns out to be a bust, providing him with further proof that gangbanging isn't worth it. However, the same can sometimes be said about the more professional level of crime he's gotten into, seeing as how Devin Weston scams our protagonists out of the cars we collect for him. I should mention as well that through the course of these missions, Franklin constantly encounters characters who he validly perceives to drag him down. Characters like Simeon, with whom he feels he has no viable future, his aunt Denise, who scolds him for focusing on himself rather than the gang, this side character Tanya, who guilts him into doing her drug-addicted boyfriend's job for free, Stretch, who is at the forefront of the CGF pyramid scheme our protagonist sees right through, and Lamar, who repeatedly drags Franklin back into hood dealings and patronizes him for not looking after his homies. In one way or another, each of these characters represents the gang life that Franklin is desperate to escape. And the really frustrating part is that even when he does seemingly escape it, this girl Tanisha that Franklin loves begs him to risk his life to clean up Lamar's mess that he got himself into because his stubborn ass refuses to even try to get out of the hood. You know what, actually, this is the perfect segue because I wanted to talk about Lamar next, so let's use this chance to get started on him. In a nutshell, Lamar acts as both Franklin's sidekick as well as the yin to his yang, while Franklin makes constant strides to get out of the hood and make something of himself. All Lamar dreams of is earning a high rank in CGF and seeing his gang prosper, and he isn't afraid to talk down to his best friend for wanting bigger and better for himself. There's no better example of their relationship than the start of the mission Repossession when the two argue over Franklin becoming Simeon's Employee of the Month. While our protagonist sees this accomplishment as nothing but symbolic of his stagnation in life, Lamar views his loss of such an achievement as a major loss in his career, and as such, he reacts to the news with anger and jealousy. This cutscene alone shows that the two have different goals in life. While Franklin wants to become successful and live comfortably, Lamar would be content with being the big fish in a small pond, i.e., the Employee of the Month at a low-paying job. Ultimately, Lamar's role in the story comes down to being the personification of the hood life from which Franklin wishes to escape due to the dangerously low financial ceiling it provides. The worthlessness of this lifestyle is fully displayed in our gangbanging missions with Lamar that just don't work out for various reasons. But in spite of the clear lack of growth that these jobs have provided, Lamar continuously shows no desire to get away from it and make something of himself alongside Franklin, as he doesn't know better than to keep taking these jobs. I'll add that this mentality itself, while I may not personally agree with it, it wouldn't be something that I take much issue with. But the fact that he constantly tries to drag Franklin back down with him, and even criticizes him for bettering himself, this is what I dislike about Lamar. Hell, this mentality gets so bad that Franklin strongly considers letting him die to the ballas just so he wouldn't have to worry about being brought back into that life anymore. For as much as I may dislike Lamar for how dumb and ignorant he is about the world though, much like Trevor, I have to appreciate this character for how funny he can be at times. Whether he's dogging on Franklin's yee ass haircut, idiotically trusting a guy he'd recently kidnapped, offering his own perspective on Trevor's relationship with Michael, or really just about any of our other interactions with him, whenever Lamar is on screen, you're usually guaranteed to have a laugh. So in spite of my issues with him weighing Franklin down, I just can't bring myself to hate this lanky dumbass. And you know what? If GTA Online is anything to go by, then at least in the end, he finally got his shit together. And for that, I'm proud of you, Lamar Davis. Moving on from Franklin's ally, let's go ahead and talk about Trevor's set of allies, Ron, Wade, and Floyd. As I mentioned before, all three of these guys are ruled by their fear of our protagonist. But despite the abusive relationship they all share with him, I'd argue that Trevor does actually care for them on some level. I'll come back to this thought in just a second, but real quick, let's get to know each of these lackeys a bit more. Apart from Chef, Ron is about the closest thing that Trevor has to muscle up in Sandy Shores, as he's the only one of these characters who we see in the weeds with us at any point. While he can hold his own well enough in the field though, Ron's main purpose is to help our entrepreneurial protagonist run Trevor Phillips Industries by finding contacts to conduct business with, as well as by researching anything that we need information on to bring profit to the business. As far as his backstory goes, Ron is a divorcee who is convinced to leave his former wife by Trevor. Now separated from her, Ron is left to live next door to Trevor, where he hosts a radio show to talk about conspiracy theories whenever he's not managing TPI. Wade, meanwhile, is likely a mentally challenged juggalo, which I guess is just a regular juggalo, who found his way into Trevor's posse after he and his friends visited Sandy Shores years ago, only for his friends to be killed by our protagonist while Wade himself was taken in by him. Of course, Wade doesn't know what really happened to his friends, as Trevor has gaslit him into believing they abandoned him, but that's neither here nor there. I'm not exactly sure why Trevor would choose to recruit Wade of all people into his group given how useless he seems to be on the surface, but to his credit, if he's given a job, he usually manages to get it done no matter what. All in all, Wade is more or less a pawn that Trevor takes advantage of by forcing him to do the grunt work he's either too busy or unwilling to do. Finally, we have Floyd, who is much more conscious of Trevor's control over him, but is still too afraid to stop him, though to his credit, he does try in his own way.
I ain't got a very big penis.
Unlike his cousin, Floyd is just a standard guy who works a well-paying job to support himself and his fiancée, and it's pretty evident based on her interactions with him that he has no desire to move up in the world by immoral means. But much like how Trevor did to Ron and Wade, when he shows up, he uproots his new ally's entire life and forces him into criminality. Despite his efforts, Floyd ends up having to help Trevor rob his place of work while being treated horribly by him. In the end, of course, this heist gains us nothing, so even after giving in to Trevor's leadership, Floyd has nothing to show for it when his girlfriend returns from her business trip. And when you add in the state in which our protagonist left the apartment during his time there, it's pretty clear that Trevor straight up ruined and ended this honest man's life for no real reason. And for that, you've really got to feel bad for the guy. Really, you have to feel bad for all three of these guys after seeing the way that Trevor has practically enslaved them. And if you do, then I feel they've all fulfilled their role in the story pretty well. But for how awfully Trevor treats them, I'd still like to believe that he does does care for them to some degree, and this can be supported by his actions. Well, I suppose Ron might be a bit of a stretch in this case, since I can't really think of any time he actually treated him better than just decent. But nevertheless, there are at least one or two somewhat heartwarming moments where Trevor treats Wade like a human being.
There, Wade. Look, you're just not cut out for honest work, alright?
To see him interact with Wade in this way may feel uncharacteristic of Trevor, or at least to me when I first saw this cutscene, I interpreted it as the writers just finding another funny moment to give to him, but realistically, I see this more as him comforting his friend than just fucking with his stooge. Then of course, after Trevor kills his cousin, he takes Wade with him to the strip club and pretty much lets him retire with a couple of hot girls at his side when he could have just killed him too now that he's run out of uses. As for Floyd, even though they don't know each other long enough for Trevor to share a decent moment with him, I again have to bring up the psychotic way our protagonist reacts to him and his girlfriend threatening to kill him because the look in Trevor's eyes alone tells me that he feels betrayed. And it's hard to get betrayed by someone you don't care about. Well, unless your name is Nico Bellic, that is. Overall, just as Lamar's main purpose is to be a foil for Franklin, the purpose of Trevor's allies is to make the player feel bad for them upon realizing the indentured servitude they've each been forced into. And in my opinion at least, the allies of both of these protagonists do their jobs pretty damn well. But what about Michael's allies? Yes, it's now time to talk about the dysfunctional DeSanta family. Let's start off with Amanda, Michael's wife with whom he frequently gets into arguments, typically about each of their unfaithfulness to each other. While this is one of the biggest strains on their relationship, another couple of issues Amanda frequently brings up is her resentment towards Michael's criminal career as well as his decision to force the family into living a lie. But in turn, our protagonist usually makes sure to remind her that she never complains about such a life whenever she takes the money he's made from it to go shopping. Next, let's go over Tracy, Michael's spoiled rich whore of a daughter. In just about all of our interactions with her, we usually see her slutting out in one way or another. Either for partygoers she's trying to fuck, or in front of all of America to become famous. If that's not convincing enough of her personality, it even seems that while she and the family are moved out of Michael's, she's taken up hot tub streaming at the best under the alias of Tracy Sucks. Well, at least the girl's got role models. Much like Amanda, she also gets into frequent arguments with our protagonist whenever he shows up to protect his daughter, usually claiming that he has ruined her life. Apart from that, Tracy herself doesn't make a huge impact on the story and more or less just exists to fulfill the role of being Michael's daughter. Michael's fat shit of a son Jimmy, on the other hand, is actually fairly involved in the story, so let's talk about him next. Similar to the others, Jimmy starts the story off as a spoiled rich kid who hates his disapproving dad. Though in his particular case, Jimmy is also a lazy, unemployed gamer who spends his free time getting high, jacking off, and probably calling people the N-word online. Much like with his daughter, there are times when Michael actively tries to be a good father to Jimmy, but oftentimes he lets his anger get in the way, which ends up hurting his relationship with his son rather than heal it. So far, I've really only described how Michael's family behaves in the first portion of this game, specifically before they all leave him, and that's honestly because after they reunite with him, they don't really do much to drive the story at all since Michael's character arc is pretty much complete by this point. Really, most of Michael's family seems to exist as a tool that the writers use to promote change within our protagonist, and they don't really serve much purpose beyond that. Whereas Franklin has Lamar who at least fights alongside him while he's dragging him down, and Trevor has his squad that he uses to help him expand his business. To me, Michael's family boils down to being a set of props used simply to advance his story. This isn't necessarily a bad thing, as I wouldn't expect the guy's wife and daughter to be in the trenches with him taking the Union Depository or anything, but I do feel like there's some wasted potential regarding Jimmy here. Let me explain. Around the time when Michael's family comes back, I feel as though Rockstar decided that Jimmy would become somewhat smarter and more capable. When he shows back up at the house during reuniting the family, Jimmy more or less takes charge by going to Michael and pushing him to go see his wife, putting in motion a chain of events that ends with the DeSantas all living under the same roof again. This doesn't seem very characteristic of the kid who got his dad's yacht stolen near the beginning of the game, but as he claims back then, that was a bad judgment call. Now, I originally didn't give that defense too much credit, but if you could consider his decision to visit Michael a good judgment call, then you might see this as a very concealed form of character development for the youngest DeSanta. Then as far as his capability is concerned, Jimmy went from needing his dad to rescue him on the yacht to rescuing his dad when Merryweather invaded the house. I didn't realize this before, and as a matter of fact, I honestly only just realized it as I typed this out, but Jimmy himself actually experienced some sneaky growth throughout the story, and that's why I feel his potential was somewhat wasted, as he could have redeemed his stereotypical Discord mod self into someone who could possibly succeed his father. You might think this is a stretch, and I don't blame you at all if you feel this way, but this honestly might be a topic I plan to revisit on my channel in the future, and if I do, then I'm confident you'd understand what I'm getting at. Also, did somebody say stretch?
But I know some sweet boys up in the pen that got bigger balls than you.
You been doing your time looking at sweet boy balls?
Yep, it's finally time to talk about the antagonists of Grand Theft Auto 5, and I'll tell you what, this game may have some fun and interesting pro tips protagonists, and while each of them may have a strong enough supporting cast for the most part, it's each of their antagonists that weaken this area of the game for me. I've already explained some of my issues with them earlier, but I want to take this opportunity to explain just how much Rockstar dropped the ball with this key role in all three of our stories. Beginning with the first antagonist that we meet, Stretch, he sort of acts as somewhat of an extension of Lamar in the sense that he too is a representative of the gangbanging lifestyle that Franklin wants to escape from at the beginning of the game, albeit to a much more negative degree, while Lamar is a representation of the small-time gangster who aspires to work hard and become an OG one day. Stretch is the entity who's already made it there in life, and as such, he gets to take advantage of the perks that such a rank provides, including taxing the profits of those beneath him on the CGF totem pole like Franklin and Lamar. Of course, our protagonist isn't down with this business model, so by extension, he isn't down with Stretch either, but for Lamar's sake, Franklin deals with his bullshit until it threatens his life, specifically when Stretch tells us that he'll offer us up to the Ballas for peace if that's what it comes down to. After this point, Stretch's MO is to have Lamar killed for starting beef with a rival gang, and he attempts this multiple times until his eventual death, but he's thwarted each time by Franklin, and that's about it for his character. That's all Stretch is. He's an OG that our protagonist dislikes, and every once in a while, he tries to get Lamar killed. He makes 2 appearances, one in the long stretch where he's introduced, and one in the finale where he's killed, by Michael and not Franklin by the way, and that's it. I guess he's also in with the Ballas or whatever, but considering our lack of attachment to CGF, this detail's pretty much irrelevant. I will say that his character becomes a little bit better if you call him every once in a while, but this is something that you have to initiate and probably won't think to do so. Yeah, there's not much else to say about Stretch. He's an almost completely absent antagonist who's so worthless that he ends up dying to a guy he's never heard of. That's all. Moving on to our next antagonist, let's talk about the leader of the Triads, Wei Chang. Mr. Chang is the Chinese contact with whom Trevor tries to form a partnership near the beginning of the game, and of course, after our protagonist destroys the rival business the Triads chose to work with, his gang becomes a hostile force. You know, like a whole third of the game later when they kidnap Michael. Chang then calls Trevor after he returns to San Andreas to make his debut in the game, and then it's still not until a few missions later that he makes his only physical appearance for like 30 seconds before his eventual death in the finale. Once again, by the way, to a guy he's never even heard of. To Chang's credit though, he at least almost kills one of our protagonists, unlike Stretch, but given how unimpactful he is as a villain overall, I might say he's an even worse antagonist than him. Oh, and one more similarity I have to draw between these two is that Chang also gets killed by the wrong guy, being Franklin instead of Trevor. I think I sufficiently explained earlier why I disagree with the narrative choice to have each protagonist kill a different protagonist villain. So for once, I'll save you from having to hear me repeat myself, but I have to reiterate how much I hate this decision as it actively worsens the story for me. Let's go ahead now and move from our weak villains onto our strong ones. Next on the chopping block is everybody's favorite billionaire douchebag, Devin Weston. Unlike the typical GTA antagonist, Devin is introduced about a third to halfway through the story, and while he immediately comes off as a rich prick, he's quickly able to fool one of our protagonists into believing he's the real deal, and by extension, he manages to manipulate all 3 of our heroes into working for him for free. Initially, our protagonist tolerates the disrespectful and even borderline racist way he treats us under the premise that his paycheck will make all the condescension worth it. But after the pin drops that we're not getting paid, Franklin and Trevor strangely allow him to fly under their radars as they've both got bigger fish to fry. Michael, on the other hand, seemingly trusts that Devin has our best interests in mind when he first hears the news, but that changes after he shows up at our movie studio to pull the plug on our film, which of course leads to his lawyer getting killed. At this point, the private army owning philanthropist seeks revenge because he's philanthropist off. So he dirtily sends Merryweather to kill Michael's family, and on the night of his movie premiere no less. God, what a dick. Yeah, so at this point, the gloves are off, and Michael is ready for a no-holds-barred fight against this bastard. And that's exactly why he lets Trevor do the dirty work of kidnapping him in the finale before all 3 of our protagonists toss him off a cliff. Oh, but not before Michael gives him a speech about American capitalism, because I guess he's kind of over the whole "you try to kill my family" thing. Right, so I'm not trying to discredit Devin Weston as a villain here, but for him to get the grand send-off of being killed by all 3 of our protagonists, it kind of feels weird to me. Don't get me wrong, I know he screwed over Trevor and Franklin enough to where they should want him dead too, but by this point in the story, this guy is much more of Michael's antagonist than anybody else's, and honestly, I think he was a great villain for him. Devin Weston is just so easy to hate, and his actions are so deplorable that it certainly feels good to kill him in the end, but it just doesn't feel like this character earned this ending. Rather, I feel the honor of being killed by our entire trio should have gone to the final antagonist, Steve Haynes. This villain is introduced to us shortly after Trevor arrives in Los Santos, and while his first interaction is solely with Michael, he quickly makes himself known to our entire cast of protagonists as he utilizes their talents for the good of the FIB, or more specifically, himself. As we progress through the game and continue building our characters' wealth and confidence as a team, we find that no matter how much power we attain, we're still under Haynes' boots since he has dirts mostly on Michael, and could easily have all 3 of our heroes locked up if we run out of uses for him. With this leverage leverage in his pockets, Haynes forces our trio to complete a wide range of superhuman tasks, including kidnapping a guy out of a skyscraper, fending off news to steal government funds, and taking on the fucking army during a bank heist. But as soon as he loses that leverage, he's very quick to show his true colors if it increases his odds of survival. On that note, that's something that I have to respect about Haynes. He is a survivor. He'll do anything and everything it takes to keep himself afloat, whether it's trying to sell Michael and Dave out like he does here, getting his hands dirty by joining us out in the field, which sure is more than two of the other antagonists ever did, or by killing his lackey with little hesitation for snitching on him. Steve isn't afraid to do whatever he deems necessary to survive. He's also pretty clever in how he plays the hands he's dealt, considering how in one of the endings, he successfully gets Franklin to obey his will by eliminating Trevor. And while you could argue that his gradual overplaying of his hands leads to his eventual downfall in the canon ending, it's hard to deny the threatening status of a bad guy who wins in an alternate reality. The only thing I don't really like about him personally is that he almost feels like a light version of Officer Tenpenny from San Andreas. And no, it's not because he's whiter than to be racist. When we're first introduced to him, Haynes almost portrays himself as the leader of his own trio, as he has Dave and the Mexican Obama lookalike rookie beside him, similar to how Tenpenny has Pulaski and the rookie Hernandez with him. Then after a short while, Mexican Obama stops making appearances, much like Hernandez after the Green Saber. And finally, both of these characters are killed in the cutscenes where they're identified as a snitch. Needless to say as well that both Haynes and Tenpenny are on the side of the law, and they both abuse their position of power to force our protagonists into doing their dirty work. In all, it sort of feels like Rockstar have built themselves a bit of an archetype of the dirty cop character, and the character of Steve Haynes is just the product of such a blueprint. Which I'm not against the idea itself of having a stereotyped character that you can insert into a story like this, but I just wish Haynes could have deviated a bit more from the character that seemed to inspire his creation, that's all. On the other hand, what I really love about Steve Haynes as a villain is that for all intents and purposes, he's actually a villain that all three of our protagonists have every right to hate. He repeatedly takes advantage of them by forcing them to do his bidding because they have no room to negotiate otherwise, and he knows it. As such, he's a villain that I love to see go down in the end. To me at least, Haynes is the villain of GTA 5 because he's the one who consistently antagonizes all of our heroes the most, and he's also the one who's actually there the most. Unlike Stretch and Wei Chang, who almost never appear, unlike Weston, who kind of just disappears for a while when Michael and Trevor are in exile, and unlike how all three of those antagonists have their sole targets for the most part, Haynes remains a constant threat to our whole squad and he never hides from them. That's why I hate that he gets killed by just Trevor in the finale, and that his death just gets mixed in with the other two more or less meaningless antagonists. Steve Haynes was a great villain, and he deserved to be the one who dies to our entire trio, and I will not be convinced otherwise. All in all, when it comes to GTA 5's antagonists, I feel like the ball was somewhat dropped. There were 4 villains in total that could have made a larger impact, but be it due to a limited amount of time to develop said villains, or illogical decisions to swap their levels of importance, all I can say is that overall, they just missed the mark. The protagonists themselves could have been written better too, but while a character like Michael DeSanta may not feel as relatable as Nico Bellic, while Franklin Clinton may not be as iconic as Carl Johnson, and while Trevor Phillips may be perceived as an iconoclast to those who long for the previous iterations of Grand Theft Auto, I still feel that they all do their job at making GTA 5's story an entertaining one to play through, and each of their sets of allies should receive some of the credit for that too. Yeah, the characters could have been better, and to be honest, I feel that splitting a story 3 ways like this definitely diminished the individual impact that the 3 of our protagonists could have made, but I really didn't even notice that until I broke everything down and overanalyzed this whole story just now. In reality, when I play this game just to enjoy it, I personally feel that these 3 individuals end up meshing together in a way that lets me appreciate this story at a level that equals more than the sum of those parts. But I think by now, I've talked way more than enough about this damn story, wouldn't you agree? So finally, let's move on to go over what I believe to be the most important feature of any video game, its gameplay. Now, as controversial as GTA 5's story is for its choice of being more cartoonish than some of its predecessors, I think many of us can agree that its actual gameplay is the make or break point of the game. After all, the reason why we all play video games in the first place is to have fun, so if it doesn't feel good or intuitive when you use your controller to play it, then that game ought to be dead on arrival. Additionally, if a game lacks enough fun features to actually keep you wanting to stick around and dump more hours into it, then its chances of survival will likely look grim. Well, that is unless it has a built-in audience that hasn't missed an entry in the past 10 years who will continually pour hundreds hundreds of dollars into the franchise, but we're not talking about sports games today. Anyway, in this chapter, we're going to be examining several aspects of GTA 5's gameplay, including many of its mechanics which will compare to other entries in the franchise, as well as plenty of its features that are either completely new or have made a grand return to the series in this title. Now then, you can't play a game called Grand Theft Auto without driving cars, so let's go over the driving physics first. Right out of the gate, as soon as you drive that first SUV during the prologue, you'll immediately notice that driving feels completely different from GTA 4. You won't get the chance to play around with these mechanics too much yet, since the game just has you drive down a straight path for the most part. But one thing you'll take note of right off the bat is that Rockstar have done away with that weird camera positioning that places the center of the screen behind the driver's side of the car. Not trying to diss on that feature too much, since it was cool back when GTA 4 first came out and Rockstar were trying to prove how edgy and different their games were now. But now that more than 15 years have passed, let's just admit that the traditional camera placement is ergonomically superior, and I'm glad that they switched it back here. Right, so mild camera angle annoyances aside, how's the driving itself? Well, as soon as you begin driving around Los Santos, you'll immediately sense that Grand Theft Auto's driving physics have reverted to the much simpler, almost arcadey feel of the 3D trilogy for the most part. While I'm sure this is a big turnoff for those of you who love GTA 4's more challenging driving mechanics that punish impatience, I think I prefer 5's more thrilling driving, as it encourages quick movement through the streets that forces you to be able to quickly adapt to changes in traffic whenever they inevitably arise. Though it is pretty annoying when you make that one critical mistake and have to restart your entire journey across town. Also, before anybody says some shit like, oh, you just don't like GTA 4's driving because you're bad at it, oh, skill issue, I actually do love the driving in GTA 4 as well. Sure, it's an acquired taste, but I thoroughly enjoy the challenge it provides. I just happen to prefer 5's over it, and honestly, can you really blame me? It's so much faster and easier to turn in GTA 5, especially at high speeds. You have full gyroscopic control while airborne to help you better land stunts, and you can even flip your car onto its wheels when it's upside down. Gone already were the days of cars flipping over and catching on fire, and now so too are the days gone of looking like a stuck turtle after you get into a crash. Finally, you can simply flip yourself back over and continue screwing around because you shouldn't be fucking punished for having fun. Oh, and one more thing I want to bring up here is how you can freely aim and shoot guns out of cars. This was one of the many features that were revamped in GTA 4, as that game allowed you to actually shoot in directions that weren't either directly in front of you or exactly 90 degrees to your left or right. And in GTA 5, it was revamped again, as you could not only perform drive-bys with more weapons, but you could also preemptively aim before firing. Additionally, you can also chuck grenades at your enemies from your car for the first time in this game, as in GTA 4, you could only drop them out your window, which is another one of those things that you really gotta get used to again when you replay it, evidently. With all this talk about shooting guns, it's only right that we now move on to Grand Theft Auto's other most important attribute, its gunplay. A lot of people will argue that shooting guns in GTA 5 is too easy and simple, and to those people, I have one thing to say to you: you're right. Shooting guns in this game is usually pretty boring to me because there's very little bullet spread, recoil is practically non-existent, and to most efficiently kill your adversaries, all you have to do is flick the analog stick slightly upwards and pull the trigger, then lock onto the next guy and do the same. Now you could argue that GTA 4 has the same problem, but at least in that game, the way the aiming system works is you have to actually hold the joystick in a fixed position to earn a headshot, and depending on how far away you are from your targets, you have to adjust the distance you need to push the stick. Additionally, even if your reticle is directly on your enemy's head in GTA 4, you're still not guaranteed the headshot if you're spraying your gun or running around. But if you have the discipline to calm down before you take the shot, you'll be rewarded with accuracy. Hell, even in San Andreas, while that game has some pretty strong auto aim, you really have to go out of your way to earn a headshot, since moving your crosshair at all will enable full free aim. So you truly have to have some skill to get that one-shot kill. Meanwhile, GTA 5 just hands out headshots like a pedophile handing out candy to kids. But let's step away from headshots because shooting in general just feels so simple in this game. Again, due to a lack of bullet spread or recoil or anything of the sort. All you have to do to kill somebody here is pull the left trigger and then pull the right trigger until they're dead, which is much more boring to me than GTA 4, which more so forces you to control your rate of fire to ensure your kill. That being said, one of GTA 5's features that benefit from its simplified gunplay is its running gun mechanics, because when you take the whole auto-aiming business out of the equation, the lack of punishment for firing at a fast rate can make it feel a lot more thrilling and devastating when you just go on a rampage through town. One more point I have to give the older games though is just the interface they provide when you point your gun at someone. In GTA 5, all you see when you aim is a tiny little white dot that turns red when it's on an enemy, and then it flashes an X when you kill them. Now while I appreciate getting feedback to know when I've gotten a kill, I still prefer the UIs of the past that actually relay information to you about your adversary, like GTA 4's that tells you how much health an enemy has, or even if they're wearing armor based on these little dashes, or San Andreas' UI that communicates their health by way of these triangular targets that change color as they get closer to death. The last thing I want to talk about that technically regards gunplay is crouching, or rather, stealthing. Yeah, this is an easy point to the earlier games. The fact that we've had to deal with this stupid ass mechanic in place of crouching for over a decade now is flat out retarded. There's no other way to put it. Oh well, at least there's the hope that this shit will be gone from GTA 6 since Red Dead 2 gave us actual crouching back. So on the plus side of it all, it seems like Rockstar have learned from their mistakes. Still on the topic of guns though, let's talk about one of Grand Theft Auto 5's major selling points back in the day, the legendary weapon wheel. This is the first of a few quality of life changes to the series that we're going to talk about, and dare I say it's the most impactful as it gives you so much more freedom to easily choose the weapon you want to use when you want to use it. Gone are the days of having to scroll through your invisible hotbar of weapons until you find the one you're looking for, because in GTA 5, all it takes is a little bit of muscle memory to select the specific weapon you need in any given scenario. In addition to this major improvement, gone too is the restriction of only being able to carry one single weapon of any class, whereas in previous titles you had to pick and choose whether you wanted either a fast-firing pistol or a heavy-hitting revolver, for example. Grand Theft Auto 5 removes the need to make such a choice by allowing you to carry as many guns as you need. However, as awesome as it is to have an entire army surplus of weaponry in your back pocket at any given moment, I also feel like it gets a bit obnoxious. For one, having all these guns in your inventory can take quite a while to find the specific gun you're looking for, since you now have to scroll through your wide selection of weapons, kind of like how you had to scroll through your inventory in previous games, thus sort of defeating one of the main purposes of having a weapon wheel in the first place. To further prove my point of this being a nuisance, this issue is somewhat solved in GTA Online since you can buy storage lockers to exclude unwanted weapons from your arsenal, but since the problem persists in the base game, I have to mention it here. My other issue with having all these guns is that it can remove some of the potential challenges you could have faced during this game's missions, because you can easily select anything you could ever possibly need whenever you may possibly need it. Yes, I know I just labeled this as a strength a minute ago, but I'd consider the freedom of choice to be a better option for free roam when you're just trying to have fun causing chaos. During missions, however, it's just too easy if you can quickly switch from a sniper rifle to an assault rifle to an RPG so conveniently. I will point out that Rockstar seems to have noticed this issue as well, considering Red Dead 2 has an updated weapon wheel that only allows you to carry 2 large weapons when you're away from your horse, which forces you to strategize which weapons you want to bring with you into battle, thus adding a bit more of an actual challenge since you aren't prepared for every possible scenario anymore. Hopefully GTA 6 implements something similar to this system, because this is something that drags GTA 5 down just a little bit for me. Also, this is just a side note, but as nice as the weapon wheel is, I think I strangely prefer the scrolling system that the older games had. It could be the fact that I grew up with it, but something in me just seems to like it more, hence why I still choose to scroll on the rare occasion that I play the definitive edition, and I also tended to scroll more in GTA 5 itself when I played it on keyboard and mouse recently. Nothing against the weapon wheel in this regard, I just like my classic controls, I suppose. Maybe I'm just weird, I don't know. Anyway, since we're talking about wheels, let's talk about the radio wheel next. Yeah, when you've got as many radio stations as GTA 5 has, a wheel to help you sort through them is definitely a must. This is undoubtedly something that GTA 4 could have really used had Rockstar thought of the idea back then, but the fact that we got it in 5 is a huge improvement. Though yet again, when I play on keyboard and mouse, I still find myself scrolling through the stations more often than not. I guess wheels just don't mix with my MLG gaming setup. That's the best explanation I've got at this point. Moving on now, let's go over a quality of life improvement that I might have to argue downgraded my overall experience of the game, and that's regenerative health. Dude, this is Grand Theft Auto. We literally do not need health regeneration because we have shit like health packs and restaurants to restore our health bar instead. Granted, GTA 5 has the occasional health pack as well, but they're few and far between because you're just expected to hide in cover and wait for your health to climb back up to half whenever you take damage. I'm not gonna lie, I find this change to be pretty damn egregious because even if your health doesn't fully regenerate, thank God, the fact that it regens at all pretty much gives you de facto invincibility. One thing I love about GTA 4 is that if you're low on health, you're also on edge because you know you're only one mistake away from wishing up daisies. So that rush you get when you reach that conveniently placed medkit to give you an earned second chance at life feels so rewarding, and then even more so when you skillfully finish the mission. Compare that feeling to the stop-start vibe you get when you have to take turns running around like a jackass shooting everything in sight, and then have to take a sudden water break when you take one too many shots. I want to be clear as well that while I may sound like I dislike the fast-paced battles GTA 5 provides, that's not the case at all. I do find the more action-based combat to have its own charm unique from GTA 4's more serious and disciplinary gunfights, but I just wish that mistakes had consequences of some sort to encourage building skill. Oh, and speaking of a lack of consequences, the last quality of life improvement I want to talk about here is the new checkpoint system introduced in this game. Yeah, so long story short, let's say you somehow fuck up the action of taking cover to heal and end up dying, or perhaps you stray too far off the mission's scripted path and face the judgment of Rockstar Games. In other words, you failed the mission. Now what? Do you have to travel all the way back to where the mission started? Do you get a text message that lets you instantly restart the mission? Nope, you actually get to restart from your most recent checkpoint. Now this seems to be somewhat of a controversial change to the franchise, as it definitely makes the game easier since it removes the consequence of failure. However, this is an instance in which which I believe it's okay to alleviate that consequence since, well, let's face it, it's not very fun to have to do everything all over again just because you got killed by that one guy who snuck up on you at the end of the mission, nor is it fun to have to go all the way across the map to try again. Rather, these options are archaic and frustrating, so if a game developer has the opportunity to remove a frustrating system from their game, I'm not going to complain if they take it. That being said, this option to skip a part of the mission also pops up if you fail it too many times. And if you've ever pressed this button, you is a bitch, plain and simple. You were not there in the trenches trying to follow the damn train, and we didn't want you there anyway. You know, I touched on this a tad a minute ago, but I would be remiss if I didn't at least take a second to discuss the excessive scripting of each mission in this game. While in past titles, you could freely take almost any aim at completing your objective as long as you got it done in the end. And even in GTA 4, the game would oftentimes provide you with multiple options to complete your task, and could even reward your creativity with alternate mission endings. GTA 5 takes a wildly different approach to its missions by scripting them in such a way that if you deviate off the intended path, you're likely to see that dreaded mission failed screen. Now, a lot of people have made a big deal out of this change, but I personally don't mind it all too much. The way I see things is Rockstar was clearly trying to tell a story in this game, and if they could only program things in such a way that required the player to stick to the script for everything to make sense, well, as long as it's still fun, then that's all that matters to me at the end of the day. And as I've already established, I found the story to be fun and entertaining to play through. Now then, I think that's enough comparisons for a minute. Let's talk about something completely fresh in GTA 5, each protagonist's special abilities. Yes, for the first time in Grand Theft Auto history, your character actually has a whole superpower that makes them fully unique to the other characters that exist in the world, and they're pretty fun to mess around with too. Let's start with Michael, who has the ability to slow down time in order to shoot much more accurately. This power is very similar to Deadeye in Red Dead Redemption, minus the ability to tag your enemies. Rather, as time is slowed, you're free to shoot anyone anywhere you want, which can easily even the odds when you're all alone against 20 plus enemies. On the other side of the coin, Franklin has the ability to slow down time when he's driving, which allows him to more easily handle his car. Turning is improved, traction is improved, and most importantly, the world is slowed down, as I said, which gives you, the player, all the time in the world to calculate how you can swerve in and out of traffic to get to your destination as fast and, dare I say, furious as possible. Speaking of furious, Trevor's special ability is, and let me check my notes here, he's too pissed off to die. Yeah, it seems legit. Basically, when you activate Trevor's power, he becomes so angry that bullets just don't affect him anymore, and contrarily, his bullets do more damage. It's pretty much the meth head equivalent of Super Saiyan, but all three of these abilities completely change the game of Grand Theft Auto by adding a whole new dimension of strategy whenever you're playing through this title. Additionally, they give you more of a reason to pick one character to play as over another if given the chance, since that character's ability may be more useful in a particular situation, which is something I usually take full advantage of. Another reason why you might pick one specific character though is because for the first time since San Andreas, you can build up your character's stats. And of course, since they're three separate people, they have three separate sets of stats that don't carry over between each other. Personally, I love that Rockstar brought these elements back into the series because back in the day, I always thought it was so cool that you could go to the gym and make CJ built like a fridge, or you could go to a restaurant and see what happens when he eats everything in the fridge. However, I don't feel like this was implemented very well in GTA 5 since most of the stats in this game either inevitably get maxed out because you naturally do the things that increase them all the time, or they never get touched because improving them would require you to grind walking around in this bullshit half-crouched mode that I've already established I hate for 2 fucking hours. At least San Andreas had minigames specifically designed to increase or decrease stats. All GTA 5 tells me to do is run around punching random people like it's a TikTok challenge until it decides my strength is at 100%. Also, let's go back to the idea of stats decreasing. Yeah, that doesn't happen in GTA 5. In San Andreas, if you want to stay built, you have to keep on going to the gym to maintain your muscle. But in 5, once a stat is maxed, it's maxed. That's it. No maintenance necessary, which is pretty boring to me. But you know what's not boring? Customization, and GTA 5 has hit this nail on the frickin' head. While GTA 4 severely lacked in this department and was rightfully criticized because of this, especially when you consider the game that it succeeded, GTA 5 brought back customization with a vengeance. Or at least it does in some aspects, including its cars. Introducing Los Santos Customs, a one-stop shop for choosing a variety of unique paint jobs, enhancing your car's body, darkening its windows, upgrading its engine, and so much more. This superior version of past games' paint sprays was clearly built on the foundation that San Andreas' mod shops had laid 9 years prior. And I know the kid that grew up customizing cars in those garages wasn't disappointed when he entered this garage for the first time, nor am I disappointed all these years later. On top of car customization though, we also have weapon customization for the very first time in this game. Yes, not only are weapons laid out in a UI that's much more convenient to navigate than GTA 4, but you can also customize each of your guns by adding attachments like suppressors and flashlights. And you can even give them a fresh coat of paint to add some color to your arsenal. Of course, these guns aren't nearly nearly as customizable as the guns in, say, Call of Duty, but it's still really cool nonetheless to see this in a Grand Theft Auto game. In addition to cars and guns, you can of course customize each of your characters as well, though this is where the depth is a bit lacking. Each character has a handful of haircuts and beard styles that you can give them, but apart from Franklin's somewhat wide variety, Michael and Trevor have about the equivalent of choices in this regard to the amount of clothing options that Nico had in GTA 4. Then speaking of clothing, there's also a pretty decent selection available here for all three of our protagonists, but don't get too married to any outfit you create since it's probably going to get reset the next time you switch to that character. On the plus side though, there's also a pretty diverse selection of tattoos available for each character for the first time since San Andreas, some of which are uniquely available to a single protagonist, like Trevor's tattoos honoring the memory of Michael, Michael's tattoos dedicated to Amanda, or Franklin's tattoos representing the families, as well as this fucking awesome one inspired by Chop. Moving on from customization now, let's go over some of the many activities that were either introduced or revived in GTA 5. First off, shooting ranges have finally made their return to a couple of the ammunitions in Los Santos, and while I don't really enjoy this activity as much as the version of it that exists in San Andreas, it can still provide for a fun and interesting challenge if you ever try to get all the gold medals in it. Additionally, returning from Vice City and GTA 4, we have a new set of optional assassination missions, complete with requests that you kill your target with a specific weapon. What's really cool about these missions too is that they directly influence the in-game stock market, another new feature in the series, which can make all three of your characters filthy fucking rich if abused correctly. Next, making their return from the 3D era, we have a few rampages that Trevor can take part in where he usually gets offended by being outed as a Canadian.
Fuck you! Hey, so I grew up in Canada, huh? What's the big fucking deal? You fucking racist!
Much like the originals, these rampages force you to use only a couple of weapons to wreak as much havoc as you possibly can within a couple of minutes in which you feel like an unstoppable killing machine. Planes make their return in this game as well, which is great because after years of only having helicopters in GTA 4, my friends and I had so much pent-up desire to recreate 9/11 that we could finally unleash upon the Maze Bank Tower in 2013. Or if you couldn't commit to the bit, you could always bail out and parachute to safety since these funny little things also made their return to this entry in the series. What's that? No, of course I'm not acknowledging the Ballad of Gay Tony. Why? No reason. Anyway, there's also several types of races you can partake in here, including street races, off-road races, and sea races, the last of which I believe are a first for the series. These are all pretty fun, but my only real issue with sea races is that they can be such a pain in the ass to start since they're so damn out of the way. But hey, if you can't be bothered to run them, you can always play the Spam A simulator that is this game's triathlons, which make their first appearance in San Andreas. By the way, fun fact, in all my time playing San Andreas, I've never even played the Beat the Cock challenge once since I never happened to be at its starting point at the correct time of day or week. Hence why I'm not showing footage of it here since I can't be bothered to acquire it. Anyway, good fucking luck running this last triathlon though, because this thing is a nightmare. As you can see, this shit is sped the fuck up and I'm only just now finishing it here. Yeah, this is my one time ever doing this fucking triathlon in my 12 years of playing GTA 5 and I am never doing it again. One other feature that makes a return from GTA 4 is the ability to hang out with friends. This feature was made pretty unique in this entry since you can get different dialogues between you and your friends depending on which part of the story that you're in. And additionally, you sometimes can't even hang out with them at all if you're at a part of the story where they dislike you. That's a cool detail, but one of its major drawbacks is that you don't quite get as much insight into each character since they have a lot less to talk about at each point of the story. Unlike how in GTA 4, it didn't matter how far you were into the game as you'd always get one of nearly a dozen lengthy dialogues with your friend where you'd really get to know them and understand why they are the way that they are. Aside from specific interactions with these characters, there's plenty of fun activities you can take part in either with them or by yourself. One of these activities is going to the cinema, where you can actually watch one of 3 short films created by Rockstar specifically for this game, including Meltdown, the movie that Michael works on, which is a pretty nice touch, and another one I want to shout out called The Loneliest Robot in Great Britain, which is just depressing as all hell. I love it. Back at home, meanwhile, you can watch a multitude of TV shows created just for this game as well, including mine and Trevor's personal favorite, Impotent Rage. Finally, we have several sports or otherwise physical activities that you can enjoy like tennis, which will get boring real fast if you select the max amount of sets like my dumbass did when I first played it. Golf, which actually lets you drive a golf cart around until you drown it in a pond. Darts, which makes its return from GTA 4 of course. Yoga, which... fuck yoga. And hunting, which is definitely pretty bare bones after you've played Red Dead 2 for even a couple of hours, but it's still good enough for what it is. In all, GTA 5 has a wide array of side activities that can keep you busy for a fairly long amount of time if you give it the chance to, and it also has a pretty good mix of features and mechanics that round everything out to create a fun experience overall. Sure, it gets some things wrong, but what game doesn't? Above all, I think that on a fundamental level, Grand Theft Auto 5 has proven itself to be a pretty fun game to just sit and play, and what I find to be particularly beautiful about that that is how it did so by taking numerous aspects and features from its predecessors and doing its best to perfect them. Though as fun as I personally believe GTA 5 to be, I also believe that to keep a player interested in returning, it has to provide that vibe that makes you need to come back. And to do that, the game must have a captivating setting. While there's certainly aspects of a game that need to be focused on more, you can't deny the importance of any Grand Theft Auto setting when it comes to getting you to pick it back up and live in its world once again. Oftentimes, I find myself either desiring to cruise down Ocean Drive in Vice City just to take in the sights of its neon lights contrasting against the stunning night sky, or I'll be longing to return to Grove Street, my home, or at least it was till I fucked everything up. The same can be said about GTA 5's version of San Andreas, as every so often, I'll feel the urge to come back to experience the bright sun casting beautiful palm tree shaped shadows on the ground, or to watch the gorgeous Pacific Ocean melt into the pretty blue sky. In this chapter, I'll be talking about several areas of San Andreas that I feel Rockstar perfectly crafted to keep me coming back to this game over a decade later, for one reason or another. When we're first dropped into this version of San Andreas, we're given a brief cutscene that showcases the beautiful and lively beaches of Vespucci and Del Perro. Throughout this area, you can find plenty of beachgoers either walking through the sand or bathing in the sun. You'll see plenty of bodybuilders working out at the outdoor Muscle Sands gym. You can take a stroll through the iconic boardwalk, and so much more. When I was little, I remember I used to spend hours hanging out at the Santa Maria Beach in San Andreas because it was just an awesome place to run around. And I have to say that the modern versions of Los Santos' beaches have successfully replicated the vibe that I used to love, because this is one of my favorite places to spend my time in this game. As far as the actual districts of Vespucci and Del Perro are concerned, I love hanging out in these areas too, just because I've spent so much time around here in GTA Online over the years, that just about Los Santos' entire west coast has become somewhat of a nostalgic home for me. I love the familiarity of its buildings and streets. I enjoy the street fair vibe that the Prosperity Street Promenade gives off. And the Vespucci canals are just so fun to speed down since its ramp-like roads and bridges are sure to give you some air. Oh, and if you look down the road on which the Del Perro Pier rests at nighttime, you're sure to feel a flood of dopamine just from the sight of the boardwalk glowing in the night sky. Moving on to the heart of Los Santos, we also have the more businessy downtown area packed with the city's skyscrapers. These towers are already an impressive enough sight when viewed from anywhere else throughout the town, but being up close to them gives me the same feeling of being in the big city that I get whenever I visit downtown Detroit. This feeling is complete when I factor in the heavy amount of NPCs that roam around here during the day, as well as when I take in this area's bright beauty at night. From the high life to the thug life, let's head over to the more slummish hoods of South Los Santos, which are packed with various gangs like the Ballas, the Vagos, and the Families, much like in the OG San Andreas. Though while it's much easier to find the beauty in the hoods of that version of Los Santos, this one's ghettos look much more realistic as they're very run down and uninviting. Now I get why the map designers did this, but I still hate it because these areas look so unappealing. I almost never spend any of my time here unless I have to for a mission. Also, I just gotta point this out. Look at what those filthy ballas have done to my Grove Street. This is what happens when you let in those goddamn purple people, man. There goes the frickin' neighborhood. Anyway, moving on from the uninviting slums, let's look at one of the most welcoming areas of Los Santos, Vinewood. This may be one of the nicest districts in the entire city as there's so many vibrant sights to see and so many places to visit. If you need some new clothes, there's a Suburban to get yourself some of the hottest threads on the market. Need a trim? Haircuts is right down the street. Need some firepower? Get strapped up at the ammunition just over there. Or if you need some ink, you can just head up to the tattoo parlor on Vinewood Boulevard. And while you're there, you can visit the glamorous Oriental Theater to watch Meltdown. Unless a rich prick shows up and threatens your family, that is. And of course, a parody of Hollywood wouldn't be complete without its own Walk of Fame, featuring names like Mad Dog and OG Look from San Andreas, Candy Sucks and Love Fist from Vice City, Donald Love from GTA 3 and Liberty City Stories, Solomon Richards from GTA 5 itself, and even Laszlo from damn near every GTA game under the sun. You just gotta love these kinds of Easter eggs. Then once you're done exploring Vinewood, you might feel inclined to check out the Vinewood Hills. Just good frickin' luck navigating them if you do, because these roads are a literal frickin' labyrinth. If you can make your way through them though, you'll be able to check out some pretty nice nice houses and neighborhoods that you'll never even dream of living in real life, but it's still a pretty nice treat regardless. And of course, if you can find yourself a view of the skyline while you're up here, you're in for an awe-inspiring sight. The last area of Los Santos I want to speak of real quick is a bit of an outlier since it's so cut off from the rest of town, but nonetheless, let's give it up for Chumash. This is another area that I like for nostalgic reasons since my GTA Online bunker has been stationed here for at least like 6 years, but personal biases aside, this is another pretty location that I like for similar reasons to Del Perro and Vespucci, and that's the fact that it's got its own view of the water as well as a beach from which you can gaze upon it. Plus, in the event that you need to update your cosmetics or could use some ammo, there's a few shops conveniently placed in this strip mall over here. Alright, since we're getting pretty far away from the hustle and bustle of Los Santos anyway, let's talk about the various quieter areas of Blaine County for a bit. Of course, we've got to start off with Sandy Shores located in the heart of the Gran Sonora Desert. While this area may be a rundown shell of its former tourist town self, there's still plenty of beauty to be found throughout this pile of trailer trash. Well, at least there is to me, thanks to some more of that good old-fashioned GTA Online nostalgia, since we used to spend plenty of time in these parts back when I used to make roleplay videos. But even if you don't have that same type of love for this place as I do, you can always find your own enjoyment fucking around at the Sandy Shores airfield, exploring the hobo-infested derelict motel, hanging out with hippies at this alien camp, or just simply taking in the view of the beautiful Alamo Sea. And if you ever get bored of the town itself, you can always travel to the outskirts of the Sandy Shores area and visit places like the Lost MC's Stab City, the quaint Yellow Jack Inn, or any of these cozy little shops along Route 68. Aside from Sandy Shores, there's also the town's much quieter neighbor, Grapeseed, that has its own airfield from which Trevor can do a few gun running missions, but apart from that, there's not much going on here that makes the area worth visiting in my opinion. There's also Paleto Bay, all the way up at the northern tip of the map, but while I'm sure plenty of us have some of that lovely GTA Online nostalgia for this place since it always had the cheapest properties to purchase, it's just so damn far out of the way that it's not even worth venturing up here if there's no mission forcing you to. Lastly, if you ever want a fun challenge, you can complete the rite of passage for any real GTA 5 player by breaking into Fort Zancudo, fending off the army, and taking off in your new military jet. Apart from all these areas, the rest of Blaine County is mostly filled with mountains or rivers that are cool to check out once or twice during your playthrough, but other than that, there's just not a whole lot going on. As empty as I've made some of these places seem though, you're pretty much guaranteed to find some form of life wherever you go in this world. Out in the wilderness, you're likely to encounter plenty of deer and coyotes that you can hunt down, or you might even find yourself being hunted down by a cougar. Whether this occurs during missions or not is up for debate, but seeing as how I'm not Australian, I don't feel qualified to cover this topic. However, I am Doug the Dog 6, so I feel pretty confident talking about the plethora of dogs as well as cats that you'll see roaming around Los Santos if you try hard enough. In addition to animals, each area of the map is obviously populated by people too, but there's also a set of unique individuals that you can encounter who help make this world feel even more alive. Some of these people are just random strangers who might need you to chase down a pickpocket for them, while others are a bit more freakish. While you're running around San Andreas progressing through the main story, you'll occasionally unlock what's called a Strangers and Freaks mission that will introduce the player to a side character our protagonist either already knows or is meeting for the first time. And some of these people are a real treat who truly liven up the world. One of my favorites is Barry, a pothead fighting for legalization who encounters all three of our protagonists at some point. When he meets Michael and Trevor, he offers them a hit of his marijuana cigarette, which causes them to see some pretty crazy shit that no amount of therapy will ever be able to solve. Meanwhile, he gets Franklin to deliver weed to his home for a smoke-in that never ends up happening.
I didn't forget I was busy. Busy, that's it. Fight the power.
Fuck.
There's also the Civil Border Patrol, with whom Trevor goes along to round up some Mexicans they've claimed are illegal, and after our protagonist sees the effects of their ignorance, he exterminates them like the roaches they are. Lastly, there's Nigel and Mrs. Thornhill, a couple of starstruck old Brits who are desperate to collect anything that has anything to do with any celebrities. For them, Trevor finds and steals souvenirs from various Vinewood starlets, with the ultimate souvenir being the actor Alden Napoli, whom we kidnap for the couple of crazy fans. Those Brits are just such lovely people. Overall, this version of the state of San Andreas is a very nice one to traverse, as it's full of a variety of fun and beautiful locations to visit. Whether you prefer its sunny beaches, its dark ghettos, or its wonderful wastelands, you're sure to find somewhere from which you can seek a level of comfort that real life may not be able to provide. It's really hard to get bored in any of these areas too, since they're all pretty much full of human and wildlife. And when you couple that with a few of the activities I mentioned in the previous chapter, it becomes pretty easy to lose yourself in this immersive world. The only major criticism I really have of this map map is its severe lack of enterable interiors that we took for granted back in GTA 4's Liberty City. But with that gripe aside, San Andreas has become a spiritual home for me in the video game world that I'm going to be a little sad to leave when GTA 6 finally comes out. Of course, I do feel some level of boredom of the state, seeing as how I've been stuck here for way longer than I ever fathomed I would. But after the occasional extended break, I always seem to feel that call to come back to this beautiful world, and that wouldn't be the case if it weren't for the various locations and forms of life I've just talked about. But I think that's enough talking about GTA 5's setting for now. Let's go ahead and move on to our final subtopic of this video, and that's this game's soundtrack. If there's one thing I've learned since I started making videos on this franchise, is that you can't have a Grand Theft Auto without having a radio packed with stations packed with bangers. The radio in any GTA game is one of its defining features. Without Radio Los Santos, San Andreas is deprived of the soundtrack to its own story. If Vice City was missing any of its radio stations, it would be missing a key part of what makes its setting so charming to visit. As for GTA 3, and if GTA 4 didn't have Liberty Rock Radio, Vladivostok, or The Beat, well, I hate to say it, but it honestly wouldn't be nearly as memorable to me as it is. So now the question is, does GTA 5 live up to the par set by the rest of the series? Let's start this section off by talking about my personal favorite radio station in this game, Los Santos Rock Radio. As many of you know by now, I love rock and roll, so in lieu of jukeboxes for which to put dimes into, as well as a standard modern rock station to listen to, when I play GTA 5, this channel is usually my go-to, and who can really blame me? There's so many great artists and songs on this station that I can and have listened to on end. You've got Baker Street by Jerry Rafferty, Higher Love by Steve Winwood, Bob Seger's Hollywood Nights as well as Night Moves, Peace of Mind by Boston, plus many other iconic songs like Cats in the Cradle, Carry On Wayward Son, Fortunate Son, and even motherfucking Mississippi Queen, if you know what I mean. But I'm still not done. I don't even care for Queen that much, but Radio Gaga is another banger they've included here. We of course have some more Phil Collins representation with his song I Don't Care Anymore, and since Rockstar were able to get Kenny frickin' Loggins to DJ this station, they obviously got a couple of his songs on here as well, being I'm Free and Danger Zone. Yeah, this station's fucking stacked alright. But in addition to these classics, we've also got some complimentary pop music playing non-stop, only one channel over on Non-Stop Pop. Once again, we're bombarded here by a plethora of great music as we have the likes of Britney Spears bringing us Gimme More, Fergie's Glamorous, Only Girl in the World by Rihanna, Applause by Lady Gaga, Mike Posner's Cooler Than Me, Midnight City by M83, Bad Girls by MIA, and Tennis Court by Randy Marsh, aka Lord, as well as a few other iconic tunes like I Want It That Way by the Backstreet Boys, and if I'm pronouncing this right, Mod Joe's Lady Hear Me Tonight. You know, this station has a pretty good reason to call itself Non-Stop Pop, considering all the consistently good vibes it pumps into my ears whenever I have it on in the car I just stole. It almost makes me feel bad for the now carless guy I left on the side of the road who can't hear it anymore. Real talk though, this is another great station filled with great songs that do a pretty good job at mentally transporting me back into Los Santos whenever I hear them in my daily life. So far, I'd say Rockstar's also been doing a pretty good job with its soundtrack. Up next, we've got the first real challenge of GTA 5's radio since we're about to talk about Radio Los Santos. I say this because, as many of you know, I'm not a huge fan of rap music, so as such, I've never been the biggest fan of this rap station. Shit, I'll go as far as to say that I used to always change the channel whenever I'd hop into a car and hear this station playing, because I just couldn't get into it for the longest time. But as I've started to expand my tastes in recent years, I've given Radio Los Santos a much more fair shot. And I'm pretty glad I did, because much like its original iteration from San Andreas, it's got plenty of great songs that I actually enjoy listening to from time to time. On this version, we've got Smokin' and Ridin' by BJ the Chicago Kid, Kendrick Lamar's Swimming Pools, aka Drank, Collard Greens by Schoolboy Q, Ali Boumaye by The Game, Bugatti by Ace Hood, plus I'm sure many more songs that I don't know by name, but if I were to hear them in-game nowadays, I'd be much less likely to switch over to Los Santos Rock Radio than I would have been once upon a time. Similar to Radio Los Santos, there's another hip-hop-ish station that I want to go over called The Lab. I believe this was actually the first station to be added to the game after the original release, and since it was so new, I distinctly remember giving it a shot out of curiosity, and I was not left disappointed. On The Lab, we've got a variety of unique songs to listen to, like Keep Yourself Alive by Phanogram, MNDR's Lock and Load, Leave by Waves, and my personal favorite track on the station, Speedline Miracle Masterpiece by, Jesus Christ, how do I even try to pronounce this? This guy right here. Just look at his fucking name. I'm not even gonna attempt to butcher that. Oh, and of course, who could forget the most iconic song on this entire station, Welcome to Los Santos, a song that sees MC8, Freddie Gibbs, and Cocaine sing and rap over the instrumentals that play in the game's intro. What I love particularly about this song is how it feels like the modern day equivalent to Young Melee rapping over the San Andreas theme song. It's just so goddamn special to me. I love it. Then just to add to the experience, right before this song plays on the station, MC8 himself calls in to request the song before shouting out Grove Street. See, I knew Rado wasn't no busta. Also, one more thing I gotta tack on here is that this station has probably my favorite non-music segment on the entire radio, where this dude calls in to do the worst freestyle of all time. Just listen to this shit.
My hair, you would swear I was Colombian. My eyes, shoo, Native American. My face, woo!
Is this guy serious?
Yo, that shit is garbage.
Alright, these next couple of channels are stations that I honest to God hated for years because I did not like the sounds they provided. The first of these is Channel X, which I've always written off as a shitty repackage of the far superior Radio X from San Andreas. The latter station had so many iconic songs from the late 80s and early 90s that helped shape my taste in music. And I still firmly believe that every song on there is a certified quiet white kid classic. But when I heard the songs on its modern iteration for the first time back in 2013, it felt like a goddamn disgrace. While Radio X played songs from some of the most popular rock bands of the time like Faith No More, Soundgarden, Stone Temple Pilots, and more, I expected Channel X to carry on that tradition by giving modern rock bands like 3 Days Grace, Breaking Benjamin, and Seether their chance to make their debut in the Grand Theft Auto series, but instead, all we got was a menu of shitty California punk rock. However, as I've gotten older and have begun to feel a sense of nostalgia for such a subgenre, this music has inexplicably begun to grow on me. I swear to God, I have no idea what changed, but out of nowhere, I've found myself fucking with its songs like Subliminal by Suicidal Tendencies, Black Flag's My War, What's Next by Off, Los Angeles by X, and The Germs' Lexicon Devil. For similar reasons to Channel X, I've also disregarded Vinewood Boulevard Radio for the longest time, since it just wasn't the kind of rock music I wanted to listen to. But again, I've lately noticed that I've been able to find some strange comfort in listening to this music for some reason that I can't quite explain. Maybe it's because it reminds me of the vibe Tony Hawk's American Wasteland provided me when I was little, because I've somewhat gotten back into that series lately. But whatever that reason is, I just can't deny my newfound love for songs like Black Grease by the Black Angels, Ceremony's Hysteria, Next Stop by Bleached, or Six Pack by Jeff the Brotherhood. But as good as these songs are, I physically cannot change the station if I hear Crawling After You by Bass Drum of Death or Waves' Nine is God. Seriously, how the hell do I join the religion of Nine-doism, because these motherfuckers have converted me. That's the last station I'm gonna give an extended shout out to, but there's still plenty of great songs scattered around the rest of the radio in this game, like Sleepwalking and The Setup on Radio Mirror Park, Loyal, a reggae remix of Lord's Royals on the Blue Arc, The Next Episode on West Coast Classics, and of course, that song you hear anytime you get into a taxi that goes deet 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 deet. Long story short, there is such a great variety of radio stations in this game that just about every player in its diverse fan base has a fair selection of music to listen to. However, as great as this is, the one downside of having so many channels to choose from is that it sort of discourages the idea of listening to any of the 75 to 90% of the other stations that play music from outside of your comfort zone. One great thing about San Andreas' soundtrack is that if there's boring commercials playing on Radio X and KDST, I know that I'll probably be able to find something great to listen to on Radio Los Santos or K-Rose instead. Or if not these two stations, maybe I can find something good on Playback FM or Bounce FM. Either way, with a relatively limited pool of stations to listen to, I'm being pushed to listen to something I otherwise wouldn't have given a chance, and that's a hard situation to put a negative label on. Or in Vice City, if I get bored listening to V-Rock, I'm pretty much forced to try listening to a new genre since there's no other rock stations in that game, which is great because without this scenario, I wouldn't have discovered a song like The Message by Grandmaster Flash and the Furious 5, which has become one of my favorite hip-hop songs of all time. In GTA 5, meanwhile, there's so many different radio stations to choose from that if something I don't want to listen to plays on one of them, then I can simply switch over to another station that plays similar music. For this reason, it took about 10 years for me to finally check out most of the other channels on this game's radio. With that being said though, I do think that more variety and more stations is better at the end of the day, but I still wanted to at least identify one of the cons that comes with the pros. But regardless of my views of the number of stations, it's hard to deny that GTA 5 not only has something for everybody, but it has so many great songs across its vast soundtrack that pretty much anybody in the world could sit down, listen to a few channels, and at least find something that they like. Not only that, but much like how many of the series' past games have songs that just exemplify everything that the title is about and amplify its overall vibe, like Today Was a Good Day in San Andreas or Schwein in GTA 4, GTA 5 has its own selection of songs that have become synonymous with it, like the aforementioned Lady Hear Me Tonight. Because of all this, I'd have to argue that this entry's soundtrack holds its own when pitted up against the soundtracks of its predecessors, and it definitely stands out as an impressive soundtrack just on its own. But now that we've talked about GTA 5's soundtrack, now that we've gone over its setting, now that we've spoken about its gameplay, and now that we've fully delved into its story and its characters, now that we've talked about damn near everything there is to talk about this humongous title, how well does it all come together? Do all of these areas fuse to create the greatest Grand Theft Auto to date, or does it all come short? Oh, and also, GTA 3's game radio goes hard, so you can delete that comment about me throwing shade now. Anyway, let's finish this fucking video, lads. Grand Theft Auto 5 has garnered a critical reputation for itself throughout its lifetime, and while for most of that time, I didn't feel the same disdain for it that many of its players have accrued over the years, I wanted to make this video because during one of my recent playthroughs of the game, I actually did start to feel those same negative feelings that I'm sure quite a few of you have for this title. I replayed this game in October and November of last year, and while the beginning of the story filled me with many of the same joys I'd felt when I played it for the first time so many years ago, my experience started to sour as I got further and further into the story. Maybe a third of the way through, I remember feeling a strong sense of dread at the fact that this was still the newest GTA game that we had. We still didn't have a new story to experience, and this one had gotten so stale that I didn't even want to finish my playthrough. But I pushed myself through it as fast as I could in order to get the footage I needed for DT December. During that time, I recall having one specific thought in my mind, that GTA 6 needs to come out so I can feel nostalgic for GTA 5. At this point in time, I felt the only thing that could revive this story I used to love was the filter of rose-tinted glasses. So I believed that maybe, just maybe, the vast community of players who believe GTA 5 to be overrated may have been right, and that's when I set out to make a video on the game. But before I made this video, I wanted to try playing it on my PC since I never really got the chance to before. So once the deadline of DT December was out of the way and I had a new graphics card that could run it, I took my time with the game and ended up having a much better experience. Maybe it's because I actually allowed myself to sit back and enjoy many more of the activities that it had to offer. For the first time since my first or second playthrough over 10 years ago, I actually played its races. I played a bunch of its different sports. I spent time customizing my characters. I played just about every Strangers and Freaks mission. Hell, I even did the 30-minute triathlon, and by the end of it all, I was left wanting to play even more. My current save game sits at about 75% completion, and for the first time, I'm actually driven to push myself to earn 100% sometime soon. All in all, I really enjoyed running through the game this time around, and it was this playthrough that led me to believe that maybe that community of players are wrong, and that GTA 5 is actually overhated. But at the end of the day, which is it? This September, I will have been playing this game for 12 years, and throughout that time, I've either loved GTA 5 or I've hated it. Both of these feelings have come in waves, so even though I like the game today, I don't exactly trust that I'll like it tomorrow. That's why, throughout the course of this video, that I'm sure it feels like you spent 12 years watching by this point, I wanted to dissect every aspect of this enormous game to come up with the most objective opinion possible on whether Grand Theft Auto 5 is overrated or overhated. You've listened to me talk immensely about the game's plot, many of its important characters, a few of its gameplay mechanics, several of its new features, many features it revived from older titles, its various and vast locations, the life within its world, and even the music that acts as your own personal soundtrack while you just play this game. While I talked, I made sure to tell you specific things I liked about particular aspects of this title and why I thought they were good, and I also went over many of the decisions I wasn't a fan of, all in an isolated environment from the other areas of the game. But when you cram everything back together to forge the juggernaut of a video game that is Grand Theft Auto 5, my least possible biased opinion on whether it's overrated or overhated is yes. The fact of the matter is that an opinion is going to be biased no matter what, and ultimately, the side of the coin an opinion lands on simply comes down to the individual who flips it. So depending on who you ask, one person might say they love GTA 5 for certain reasons, and another might say they hate it for other reasons, but neither of them are wrong for feeling the way they do. At the end of the day, it all comes down to personal preferences and philosophies, so who am I to decide whether or not Grand Theft Auto 5 is a good game? For the record, I'm not going to leave you all with a non-answer, because if you just gave me, what, like 2.5 hours of your time at this point, then I think you've earned the right to hear my personal opinion that I actually do think GTA 5 is a fine game, and honestly, I really don't think it quite deserves the hate that it's gotten over the years. Do I think it's the best GTA game? No, that honor still goes to San Andreas, and I'll straight up admit that this opinion is almost entirely based on nostalgia. So if you prefer San Andreas 2, or if your favorite GTA is Vice City, GTA 4, either one of the stories games, GTA the episodes of Liberty City or whatever else, or even if your favorite one actually is GTA 5 itself, then I'm not going to hold any of that against you. I'm sure you have your reasons for liking what you like, and I'm not going to try to convince you otherwise. So if I didn't plan on giving some sort of definitive answer on whether GTA 5 was a good game or not, why did I make this long ass video about it then? Well, the main reasons are the same reasons why I've made videos on many of the franchise's other titles. I enjoy going in depth on these games, breaking them down to their cores, and figuring out exactly what I personally like or don't like about them. And because doing so forces me to critically analyze aspects of each game that I otherwise wouldn't have taken the time to learn about. Additionally, doing all of this just helps me better understand why I don't like certain things about a game and allows me to figure out what could have been done better, like how GTA 5 could have benefited from a gunplay system more akin to GTA 4's, for example. But I also like making these videos for you guys, because while I don't intend to change opinions necessarily, I still wish to offer a perspective that might make you either consider changing your beliefs, or might further cement them. Either way, if I've gotten you to critically think about this game the way that I have, then I'd consider it a job well done. Or if you're just listening to this as background noise, then that works too, and thanks for the view. Now then, with all that being said, where do we go from here? No, not in this video that I'm currently 103 pages into writing, but rather, what's next for Doug the Dog 6? Let's go ahead and chalk up the games that I've already covered so far in the GTA series. I did 3, Vice City, San Andreas, Liberty City Stories, Vice City Stories, GTA 4, GTA 4 The Lost and Damned, and now GTA 5. I guess that leaves the Ballad of Gay Tony as an obvious candidate to make a video on, but I'm not quite ready for that just yet. There's always the original top-down GTAs as well as Chinatown Wars, but those aren't really on my agenda yet either. You know what? I know I've just spent God knows how long talking about GTA 5, but I think there's still something else about it that I could talk about, and if all goes well, I should be back sometime next month to cover it. I'm not going to spoil anything just yet, but have you ever wondered what could have happened to our protagonists in an alternate universe? While you ponder that idea, consider subscribing if you haven't done so already so that you get notified when that video comes out. But while we'll all have to wait for that one, you can still show this video some love by dropping a like on it if you've enjoyed what you've just watched. Or if you weren't all that impressed by my work here, leave a like anyway, or I'll tell Trevor he's got a place to stay at your house, and trust me, you do not want that. Last but not least, don't hesitate to tell me your own opinion on GTA 5 down in the comment section. Whether or not we agree on things, I always love to read what you guys have to say so long as you're respectful about it. So feel free to share what's on your mind. Other than all of that, if you made it this far into the video, I would like to sincerely thank you for watching. I appreciate the fuck out of you, and you absolutely deserve this warm cookie as a reward. Anyway, I'm about to hit 104 pages here, and if I keep rambling, it'll be 105 in no time, so I'm gonna take this time to get the hell out of here. Thank you all again for your support. As of the time of writing this, I'm about to hit 5,000 subscribers, and as of the time of reading this, I'm already at 5,029, and that means we're officially halfway to 10K. Let's see if we can hit that by the end of the year. Anyway, thank you all again for watching, and until next time, this is your boy Doug the Dog 6, and I'm signing off. Have a great month.